The end of the world never comes on its own, and it never gives any warning to prepare for it. And that's what happened to the world where the god of the sword, Karzarian Levandian, lived. People who were not prepared for such a terrible outcome were thrown from a warm, comfortable world into a wild, bloody chaos where they had to fight monsters to survive, simply for the sake of survival. And there were no exceptions because everyone was affected, receiving their dose of cruelty, just like the young boy who became the hero of the world. In harsh conditions, people grow up very early, skipping such an important stage as childhood and youth, immediately learning to survive and fight for their place under the sun, as is the case today. And now, young Karzarian's life began without any right to make mistakes or rest, and a series of days without a minute's rest began, when his whole life turned into a battlefield. Day after day of training turned into weeks, honing magnificent skills that brought him step by step closer to the status of the greatest warrior with godlike power. Then came months of battles, and each time, everyone plunged into the depths of hell for the simple fact that they dared to be born in such difficult times that burned them alive. Year after year passed like leaves in the wind, but the apocalyptic madness seemed endless, because the world, as if it did not want to fight anymore, was gradually dying. 10 whole years passed in an endless battle for life, so that in the blink of an eye, everything had already slipped away, but the reality of the apocalypse remained the same. In such difficult conditions, willy-nilly, with constant battles and stress that knew no rest, Levandian gradually became a man for whom battle was life. Naturally, having become a man capable of defeating a monster with a sword, you will never know fear, because fear is the main scourge, no matter how great the enemy may be. Even if you are tired and have no strength left to fight, you have no right to give up, because if one person gives up, everything that people previously called home will be destroyed. The world has never been closer to its end than it is now, and even the enemy understood that the end of human history had come and that it was better for the last hero to surrender without a fight. The world was doomed, but it was necessary to stop only so as not to waste such a valuable talent, because he would die, rotting like compost on the blood-stained earth as a sacrifice. The enemy said that there was no need for unnecessary sacrifices, and why fight against what was already inevitable? It was better to become a sword in his hands. Then such talent would definitely not be wasted. It was the greatest insult that could be hurled at a man who had fought to the end for his life, so it sounded ridiculous, like mockery. Of course, Karzarian understood that the world had fallen, that there was no chance, that, in essence, the world no longer existed, that it was useless. But it was better to die than to become a weapon in the hands of the enemy, the destroyer of the world. Even if this was to be the last battle for the golden-haired young fighter, he would rather die than become a puppet in the hands of the demon who had destroyed the world. It is frightening to imagine that one could voluntarily become a weapon of the one who destroyed your people, your world, and your country. So like any decent person, he accepted death. Even if he cannot hold out for long and the monster will wear him down, there is no other way. Otherwise, it will be worse than death and he will become a toy. He will be led by a demon who came to subjugate people and encountered a young warrior who, for some reason, did not want to surrender to him. The golden god, on whom the fate of the world depends, understands perfectly well that he will most likely not emerge from the battle alive, but it is worth dragging his enemy with him to hell. Fear is not an emotion that can be allowed to enter the mind at such a crucial moment, and this man did everything he could to inflict more damage on the monster. This time, the demon was very powerful because it did not die so easily from his attacks, unlike his rotten brethren before him. It is very difficult for Goldilocks to fight, as can be seen from his movements, because the enemy is too heavy and the young man's attacks are like the bite of a dung fly to him. For the demon, all these attacks are nothing more than the feeble attempts of a worm to escape from the sole of a boot, so let him not try to inflict any harm, for he will die. He jumped in and got what he deserved, because his armor cracked under the blow, exposing his flesh to the impact, and now the young man will cough up blood from such a brutal blow to his body. It must have been painful, because the force with which he was thrown back was such that the young man flew like a ball in the wind, even though he resisted until the very end. The demon attacked more and more brutally, and with each blow, his strikes became harder and harder, leaving wounds on the fighter's body, and he coughed up blood but did not give up. The monster watched as the man, whose life was about to end, refused to simply accept its terms and live as a weapon, wanting instead to die. The demonic titan's job was first and foremost to offer this young man mercy and the role of a talented swordsman, but he would rather die than listen. Probably for the first time ever, the titan had the opportunity to see such a stubborn offspring of the human race, and as we know, such people quickly give up once their spine is broken. Even now, even if this promising young warrior is coughing up blood as he dies, he still has no intention of simply letting go of the monster that destroyed the world. The god of the sword would never surrender, even if that sword was held to his throat, and even now, when this demonic creature stood over him, expecting his lawful obedience. In this case, Bright blue, cold, ice-colored eyes watched the crystal on his neck, which was clearly very important to the demon as his weakest point, which of course she would never get. Because the gaze that searches to the end for the place to strike will never be turned to defeat, submission, or supplication. Because the only thing that monster could see in those eyes was hatred, a desire to crush, no matter how great the enemy's advantage was now in the arena. The demon now swung at Karsarian, intending to strike him in the head, but his efforts were in vain because, even though the man was smaller, he was several times more agile. Karsarian, taking advantage of any opportunity, tracks down any chance to strike the enemy while he has any opportunity to do so. At any moment, the battle could swing in favor of either the humans or the enemy, bringing the world to a sad end forever. The demon attacks with particular ferocity, seeking to kill the annoying worm that still dares to crawl under his feet and try to bite him. Fate spares no one, and even if you are a great hero, you still have to be careful not to accidentally fall under the hot hand, because it will be the end. But he is the kind of person who will not give up until he delivers the final blow to the enemy's main weak point, which he did by striking the crystal on his chest. And that's when they started the Devil's Machine, because as soon as the pendant cracked, the demon immediately became angry and promised the blonde bastard death. However, there was no need to try too hard because Karsarian Levandian was barely standing on his feet after the deadly blow to his chest. But he survived. And he didn't just survive, he destroyed the demon's main relic, which now began to crumble right before his eyes, which meant victory, as promised. As they say, if you dare to raise your sword against Karsarian, pay for your audacity with your life, because no one was going to let him go just like that. And so the demon finally died. It dissolved into ashes in the sky as if it had never existed, for there was no other way out of the situation, because Karsarian had promised not to lose even to a demon. For finding himself on the brink of death, watching his enemy disintegrate into hundreds of tiny fragments in the sky, his death was definitely worth it. He died, but he took with him to the other world an enemy who was a threat to the whole world, and now that the job is done, Karsarian Levandian can go to the other world. His eyes faded, and with every second life slipped away, though his gaze remained fixed on the blue skies until the very end, to capture the beauty before he faded away. The sky was beautiful. What was there to hide because it was impossible? Because it was the last thing you could see before fading away forever in the embrace of eternity. But as we know, in this world, nothing appears out of nowhere and disappears without a trace. And so the will of the god of the sword did not disappear, finding its embodiment in another. And as is often the case, no one expected that the soul would be reborn in a young man who, at first glance, seemed to have nothing. He is a simple resident of an ordinary metropolis, inconspicuous, and dressed as simply as possible so as not to stand out. But there is something special even in the pebbles under his feet on the road. The young man's eyes alone betrayed his complex character, that of someone who knows his true power and his place in this big world. It is clear that Karsarian's will has not perished, and that he still lives in a new body adapted to the realities of Earth. And this young man is watching for a certain signal. He stands at the gates of the zone where the heroes are tested, and he needs to scan a document confirming identity so as not to let in the weak or civilians. Those whose names are not in the database and who are simply civilians are better off not going in, because there will be danger waiting for them that is clearly bigger than a spider on the wall. And it will hurt. And the portal to this so-called zone of no return is located nowhere else but in the center of Seoul, in the Yongsan district, because where else would you put a base if not in the capital? It is clear that the young man knows what he can and cannot do, and he will decide for himself whether he is a civilian or an unregistered hero, so he will kick the door open. And such a cloud of dust rose, as if the door had been knocked down by a bulldozer. So strong was the wall of dust raised by this insolent brunette with wolf eyes. He doesn't even care that the system has raised the alarm because of an unregistered insolent person who has decided to test his strength and survivability in the arena. The siren certainly annoyed him, but the one who became the reincarnation of the golden god of the sword from the destroyed world knew perfectly well what was dangerous for him and what was not. Moreover, if he sits on his ass for a long time and waits for the weather to change, he will quickly degenerate. So upon arriving in the forest behind the gates, the young intruder throws down the gauntlet. He takes a new step towards what may await him in this forbidden place, but it seems that no one can help him now, and there are definitely no people here yet. Keep your ears open, because this is a forest for heroes, and here you can be caught like a small puppy by the scruff of your neck and handed over to the law enforcement agencies like a rat. They are quick to react, and think about how they appeared. Handsome men in uniform and with weapons, who immediately raised the alarm saying that the boy was lost and didn't know where to go. Of course, they don't care what he was going to do or what happened, but they are already leaving. So it's better for him to go with them while the wind is calm. But no, that's not an option. But this ragamuffin ignored them, passing by and only glancing at them with his amber eyes, so empty that it was as if he did not deem those he met worthy of his attention. It's quite a sight to come to the forest where the heroes are training in shorts and t-shirts, which is impossible not to notice. And this outfit, more suited to the beach, reveals that the boy is not a hero. Yes, in modern times, even porters and warriors can dress more casually, but this outfit looks as if he was dragged here from the beach. A backpack is an even more unusual choice for going into the forest, and all that could be done now was to pity this unfortunate, deceived fool. The heroes suggested that he might be one of the dim-witted porters who had been abandoned by the heroes he had arrived with, but that couldn't be because he was a beggar. And now this little man in their eyes says he understands what has been said, but as he said that he came here himself, it sounds paradoxical coming from his mouth. But still, no one believes his nonsense because they definitely abandoned him. And he is ashamed to admit that he was fooled because, in their opinion, you can't just walk in like that. Therefore, one can only feel sorry for him. And the eldest of them has seen many such proud people who walked through the gates with hope for one thing, but they were deceived like little children, heroes. And she said in a parental tone that what they show on TV is a scam for kids, and that it would be better to first get an official hero certificate and undergo training on site. And these are the gates of rank C, so it's better to even drop down to level F first. But as the brunette said in response, he understands that they are helping him, but he doesn't feel grateful. This is certainly audacity. Of course, they have seen a lot of shit before, but this is the first time they have encountered such an insolent hero. He is either feeble-minded or simply playing kamikaze. He's definitely crazy, willingly rushing into this without knowing what he's getting himself into and how he's going to get his ass kicked. The heroes would be better off listening to their senior Hyun, and they shouldn't get involved because if someone has rejected their concern, then let them learn about life through their own experience. After getting a couple of beatings, maybe they'll understand where they've gotten themselves into trouble. The gates are not at all like the cheap decorations they show on TV for dim-witted fools. In reality, without the tinsel, it's just a meat grinder. It's a place where, from the very first step, dangerous monsters await. Monsters that will devour a person like a snack, such as a huge swamp orc that is always hungry. And it seems that what the warriors were so afraid of will come true. And now there will be a game of dolls here, where a warm and living person will be the test doll, but the show is long. Growl or don't growl. But the one who caught you, even though he looks like a weakling who would fly away with a gust of wind, hides something that not everyone can imagine. A normal person, even a stray or abandoned one, would have hurried to leave now or left with the group at the very beginning, but there was no fear in his eyes. He even managed to dodge the blow that followed the warning. Well, if he's so confident, then maybe after all these years he can try to shake things up. The blow didn't even scratch him, only scattering the flies around the young fighter, who seems to have seen such tricks more than once, but no, it seems only to the people around him, and he is in the know. Oh, and now the real slaughter will begin, because a legendary gladiator has been released into the arena, who will be a match for any saber-toothed freak, as always. The orc probably expected this man to run away from his roar, but a rather unpleasant surprise awaited him because this black-haired boy was here. He didn't run away and, turning around, said some nonsense about how he had been waiting for this moment for 10 years to deliver such a crushing blow. Well, it was unexpected. This small, seemingly unattractive boy in shorts completely unsuitable for the training field was now tearing the giant's body to pieces as if it were a toy. The giant's quick loss of his head was not long in coming because he faced an opponent who was clearly stronger than some random heroes. It was truly a lightning-fast blow that was able to rid this location of a huge monster that would probably have taken a whole team of warriors a long time to defeat. And this was just one man who was considered an abandoned squire, who now recognized that his current body was no different from Karsarian's previous strength. As they say, the reflection has changed, but the contents are still the same as the powers. So it would be a sin to complain now because only the vessel has changed, not the filling. It was nice to win, and even a long time ago, his hand reached out to take the weapon of the enemy he had defeated as his rightful prize. And indeed, the sword he got was quite impressive, even though the blade was crooked and clearly rough work, but it was quite good for a start. The reborn god of the sword paused for a second, staring at the blade, probably unimpressed by such a rough cut, but then something caught his attention. Perhaps what would be found next to the piece of meat left over from the orc's body could indeed be a valuable resource that would pay for the cheap, crooked sword. As they say, you have to take and get what you see. And this young enthusiast, guided by the experience of his past life, tries to extract the resource from the battered body. And yes, he pulled it out, and it was definitely something worthwhile. An amber stone similar to what is called a magical stone of power, which every hero needs. And this is a low-level magic stone, which in the past was so insignificant that the former Karsarian would not even have looked at it. But now, it's a different story. Let's put it in the backpack just in case, so that we can figure out what to do with it later. Because in this small world, you can't throw away such valuable resources. In principle, he got what he wanted and could leave after hiding the relic and getting ready to do the brunette. But according to all the traditions of such situations, there would be no peace. And he was right to pay attention to what was happening in the background, because there was some unexpected activity in the bushes that no one could have expected. It's funny because orcs never come alone, and smaller orcs were hiding in the bushes who also wanted to eat. But as they say, there's nothing that a brunette can't handle. They won't let you enjoy life because a whole bunch of magnificent freaks of all sizes and colors came tumbling out of the bushes. So as they say, oh dear. The brunette understood perfectly well that there couldn't be just one orc on the training ground, so he expected his kin to appear from the bushes in the near future. The goblin's attack was not long in coming, but it was only a pathetic attempt to scatter the flies around his target, which did not work at all. Resourcefulness works, so in any situation, even if you only have a stone in your hands, it's better to throw it, because even a small stone can cause maximum damage. Even after his rebirth, he did not lose his strength and accuracy, and with a simple stone he was able to knock out a huge orc who could easily twist off the head of a healthy man. In general, this young warrior certainly has no shortage of reflexes and strength, which is why the orcs definitely cannot count on any mercy. No matter how hard his comrades try, they will suffer the same fate as their swift leader, because this young man, though small, is surprisingly strong and agile. Even such a crowd did not frighten this young fighter, because the spirit of Carcerion was alive in this new body as never before. And how wrong those four heroes were at the beginning. They headed for the exit, trying to forget what had happened, trying to get that strange young man out of their heads, who had infuriated them with his self-confidence back then. But how could they forget? Even the red-haired girl understood that the young man was, of course, a thorn in their side, but he was still a human being, and in the forest with empty hands, that meant death. So, due to her natural empathy, the red-haired girl wondered how he was doing and whether he had died, even though her companions didn't understand why she was worried about him since he was a fool. In general, why worry about someone you don't even know? He decided to die, so let him get himself out of this mess if he wanted to play around. But there is one curious detail. Agents from the control center were already here, so there was no need to get worked up, because who needs extra stress right now? This place is called the Namsan Gate, and it's a sea-level location, so these aren't just ordinary thugs, but elite agents of rank B or even higher, so relax. And as a rule, even without weapons, if you don't rush at the monsters, the crazy youngster won't die, and everyone agreed with the words of the old man Hyunnim, because he has experience. Then this little idiot would surely be crying his eyes out, drowning in snot, waiting for the agents to save him from such scary, huge goblins, because he is so weak. If they knew that this so-called pale and weakling was throwing punches in all directions, they would have sat down on the road dust on their asses, because who knew about his strength? The youngster is a berserker, tearing goblins apart with his bare hands, even though he is smaller than a goblin's leg, so there is no need to worry about him unnecessarily. He doesn't even look human now. He's some kind of devilish machine for cleaning up, because there's not enough room for the power of the god of the sword in this thin body, but his muscles are bulging out. Wow. The power of this Korean reincarnation of Carcerion would be enough to turn the earth upside down twice. That's how strong this brunette is. It's more likely that the goblins themselves will cry because the new god of the sword will humiliate him with his bare hands, and if the agents and heroes saw this, they would definitely fall. It's not worth turning your back on this young man, because the golden god of the sword will always find a clear point to strike, and it will definitely be the back of the head. And the back of the head can be split in two like a nut, and at least one stone of power can be extracted from it. But it is worth doing this even if the reward is meager. But beggars can't be choosers, so a stone from a headless orc is good enough, because a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, so the god of the sword knocks all the shit out of his foot. The job is done, and the toothy swamp freaks are finally dead, and it's time to collect their trophies and move on because, after all, we have to go home. The sword is rough and not very elegant, but it is strong and can serve as a hammer to extract the precious stone from the skull, like a nut kernel. And this nut must be retrieved so forward, and the young god of the sword, not afraid to get dirty, will remove the shell from the coveted nut that is destined only for him. It's a bit of rough work, but the brunette cleans it up, putting everything he has obtained into his backpack before going home, because it's worth hurrying before the cops are set on you. It seems that a ragged, dirty boy in shorts and a backpack has gotten lost here. His team of warriors has abandoned him, but the agents will simply lead him out of the forest, and that will be that. His harvest wasn't rich because so far he only had a dozen low-grade stones and 16 medium-grade stones, so he had to keep trying until it grew. He was walking calmly and thinking when the agent's voice, like the cry of a wild beast from the bushes, shouted that the intruder had been caught and that he was standing there, so they had to take him. Well, they won't let him relax at all, so since they found him, now it will be fun, because the agents won't let up with their investigations, so he is very much at fault. He had entered a guarded area, and this was a very serious violation because the area was definitely not simple, so the agents had definitely not been sent here from the street. They were employees from the gate control center, so it's better for him to voluntarily show his ID, and if he doesn't have it, it's better to go with them. Kartsarian didn't know what this gate control center was, or maybe he just didn't care about such trifles, so he asked what it was, since it was so important. The agent firmly hinted that he should follow their instructions, or the consequences would be dire. But Kartsarian himself didn't understand what this bullshit was all about. He was already tired of them and their chatter about violations. First, it was that group of annoying heroes, and now these clownish agents. They annoyed him more than a fly buzzing in his ear. And he didn't mince words, saying that it was such a pain in the ass that he'd seen it all before, so he definitely wasn't going anywhere with these guys, so let them go. The agents realized that it would be impossible to talk to him normally, so it would be better to get handcuffs to restrain this stubborn youngster who had decided to act tough. It would be better for him to go with them now and not resist, and do as they say, because if the offender refuses to cooperate voluntarily, they will definitely use force against him. And the blonde agent wasn't joking around and grabbed the young fighter's arm, hinting that he was definitely in for trouble now and should let them handcuff him, because it would be unpleasant otherwise. And all the injuries the young man would receive now would be his responsibility, so it was better for him to go to the control center with them and resolve everything peacefully with his ID. But the young man was not so easy to deal with because the god of the sword immediately twisted the blonde man's arm, showing him that he should keep his hands to himself and not touch him. This is a direct attack on a high-ranking official, so now Kartsarian has essentially challenged them and will receive such a beating that he will not be able to carry it all on his own. This insolent youngster looked at him with golden tiger eyes and said that it was better not to invade the agent's personal space because otherwise he would not be able to walk away. To be honest, the agents were in a state of shock because their colleague had been challenged, and this was a violation of all the rules, so now force would be used. The agents immediately drew their energy swords in order to break the intruder by force and bring him in handcuffs to the control center if he did not come willingly. If he doesn't want to come himself, the forces will bring him, but he will be responsible for any injuries. And they do have fourth-class magic weapons, but it's too early for them to rejoice. These magic sticks may work against orcs, but against him they are a complete waste, so they should get out of there while the wind is still calm. Before starting a global massacre, the brunette gives the agents of order a 10-year warning about what will happen if they do not obey him. They should leave immediately because if they don't, they will suffer even more. And indeed, the threat is stronger than ever and the young man is truly dangerous. It seems that he warned them for a reason that the agents should leave peacefully while he lets them go without a fight, because in the next second, it will be a real bloodbath. With the same confidence with which he spoke, the young man now kicks those who decided they could arrest him, even beating them with his bare hands. They were the first to start the fight, but even now, when some kind of weapon is used against him, the brunette even rolled his eyes in response to such provocation from the agents. For him, they are nothing more than annoying flies, against which it is a pity to use weapons, so he can deal with them using only his bare hands and feet to kick. With a well-aimed knee strike right to the spine, the god of the sword easily knocks out the center of gravity of the agent, who seems to have undergone special training before coming here. But he was quickly thrown around by a small kid who, at first glance, didn't even seem to have any fighting skills, but it turned out that things weren't so simple. The man, who was several times larger than Kartsarian, flew to the side, sweating profusely and coughing up blood, because he had definitely knocked out a couple of teeth with a blow to the jaw while jumping. He was humiliated in front of his comrades by some random intruder who was so brazen that even the experienced agent's eyes popped out of his head at such a performance. To be honest, it was starting to annoy him, so he gritted his teeth and prepared to show the youngster his place in the hierarchy. But something went wrong. It seemed that this insolent youngster was standing right in front of him. Just reach out and grab him. What else could he wait for? But indeed, attacks from him were to be expected. The magician stood in front of him and everything seemed normal, but at that moment, it was as if ripples spread across the water and Kartsarian's silhouette blurred before his eyes. Wow, he just disappeared. You couldn't wrap your head around it because it just didn't make sense that a random fool would be such a powerful fighter with experience. And he shouldn't have turned away because he immediately received such a blow to the solar plexus that he would have vomited his guts out. But fortunately, he held back and got away with minor injuries. He just needs to spit it out and everything will be fine, but damn, what a powerful blow from this simple-minded fool. It takes away all desire to fight, and he stands there gasping for air, his hair tousled, trying to ask what the hell this anomaly on two legs is, with a mop of black curls. And Kartsarian asked if there was a real problem with the heroes from the database, and the agent said that as long as the law wasn't broken outside the gates, they wouldn't be sent here. But there is one thing that ordinary people could not possibly know because it is a really important thing that is hidden from ordinary people, but this one knows about it. It is the very wormhole that is a passage to another world, and it spawns various monsters all over the world, scattering them randomly in different places. The stones that fall from them during the hunt are used here as a new energy resource, which is why the gate is so heavily guarded. That is why the gate is under the complete control of the state, which regulates passage and imprisons monsters. In addition, there is another important place in the security system. It protects the very space that gives rise to those monsters, the rift between the fabrics of space, which is the true source of anomalies on Earth. Okay, that's clear. And Karzarian asked that no matter which way he goes, the agents will look for him and never give up, because that's their job. What's more, they are now accusing him of illegally entering this territory, and on top of that, they have thrown in a lot of other charges as well. The agent replied that everything was correct, and that it was the system's job to report illegal entry and send agents here. But there was one very important detail in this conversation. It's actually much harder to get into the rift than into the gates themselves, so the association won't just let it go because the task is really extraordinary right now. In general, Karzarian didn't care about all these rules because he was the one who made the rules here. So it would be better for the agent to shut up and not interfere. The agent pointed out that simple conversations would not break down this fortress wall, so it would probably be necessary to use force again in the name of the law and the appearance of work. Now, when he was ready to have his nose broken again, Shaden realized that he should have immediately notified headquarters that this brat was really out of his mind. However, it was too late to panic when you were literally being held by the face with a hand, especially if your nose was broken. Then you could consider the story over and write everything off as lost. This mosquito who called himself an agent had already become quite annoying to the young reincarnation of the god of the sword, so he flew away like an annoying mosquito on a hot day. God, how they had already annoyed this young man, who, before coming here, had encountered a very interesting thing: the rebirth of souls into different worlds. Even if the agent was now shouting after him that this damn freak would still answer for what he had said and done, the brunette simply walked away, ignoring all the screams. Let him threaten revenge as much as he wants, but he knows perfectly well where he must go and what he will do on his way there, because he doesn't care about anything, because he himself is the fruit of truly miraculous metamorphoses, reborn after the complete destruction of his past incarnation and that whole world. At the moment when he was pulled into the interdimensional fabric and the pain ceased to reach the nerve endings of his long-dead body, there was a voice in the darkness. At first, Karzarian could not see or hear anything, but then the mysterious voice pierced his ears like someone's death cry in a state of hellish agony. He lost consciousness and felt something pulling him down. It was probably death. More precisely, it was what he considered to be the embodiment of the death of the physical body. However, as is well known, according to the law of harmony in this world, nothing simply disappears or appears for no reason, and so it was now, for Karzarian would not die here. After all, it was not death, but the same intermediate point between purgatory and what people call the possible heavens before the rebirth of the soul. Blonde Karzarian seemed to see the whole world with his head, and the one standing before him really aroused the curiosity and questions of the former hero of the divine sword. Before him stood the one who was destined to become his body in the new earth, a thin, weak, and pale boy in simple shorts and a t-shirt on an emaciated body. Karzarian asked who this mysterious young man was, and the young man replied that his name was Jun, and that he was dying, as if it were not a sad thing, and that he had a request. The young man asked the former hero that if he listened to his request, he would simply disappear without a trace and no longer cause the blonde any trouble. However, the hero coldly refused, leaving the young dying man in a state of shock, thinking that he would never see his cherished desire come true, so he would have to resign himself to his fate. So Dojun was upset to hear such a sharp refusal, realizing that he would not see his cherished desire come true, so it was not his destiny to get what he wanted. But the mysterious Karzarian explained that he did not regret his life, but there were things that had saddened him greatly during his life and that he could not let go of now. After a decade of fighting side by side, his best friend betrayed him, his country was destroyed, his comrade died, and his family was gone. He had nothing left in life. The people from his world, including his family, himself, and his friends, wanted to live life to the fullest. But now, at the very end, that once great desire seems meaningless. And there is no hiding the fact that Dojun is experiencing the same emotions right now, feeling that his desire really seems insignificant now as never before. He lived in complete suffering, of course, but he didn't want his grandmother or his sister Yunyan to go through the same suffering that kept him in limbo. Karzarian decided to listen to what the amusing young man had to say, since if he wanted something, it meant that his desire was sincere, since it was not just for himself. Hearing that the golden-haired hero was ready to fulfill that desire that warmed his soul, the young man perked up because now his will would be fulfilled without a doubt. And most likely, it was the desire that had been kept in the soul of the dying young man for so long to continue living, but instead, Karzarian would live. That is how this story began. And now, the paths led to the Hassan Digital Complex in the Gimchin area, where the former god of the sword went in the body of the sick Dojun. Now it has become known as the Complex of Heroes, and after the appearance of a rift in it, the turnover of magic stones extracted from the miraculous living gates has displaced IT companies. And now, in this place, among decent people, there was a young man who looked as if he had gone through hell, as if he was looking for something. Looking at the display window of one of the exchange offices, Do-jun thought that he should probably take a look inside, since stones were now being exchanged for normal money as a matter of course. Behind the window, he was greeted by a young exchange worker who was probably bored from the stagnation, because this young man with a tattoo probably hadn't seen a single hero all day. Do-jun said he wanted to sell some magic stones, and the cashier said he had come to the right place, as they had the best prices in the capital, if not the whole country. No sooner said than done, the young man dumped all the bright red crystals he had brought with him out of his bag, without bothering to clean them, and they were covered in blood. The poor cashier probably felt sick to her stomach when she saw the blood-stained stones, thinking that he should at least wipe the blood off them before selling them to him. However, he had no right to refuse the crystals, so he asked the customer to sort through the large quantity and offered him a cup of coffee. Do-jun would probably have agreed to even a cup of water because he had to wait a very long time for the cashier to finish counting the resources he had brought and tell him the price. The cashier probably decided that the young man couldn't count because he was such a beggar, so he decided to charge him a huge commission, even though there were many high-grade stones. If you subtract the 40% commission, he would get about 5,460,000 Korean won in his pocket. But something was wrong here. Do-jun asked the cashier to wait because he had obtained all these stones and was buying them at a lower price. So what the hell was this 40% commission? That was robbery. The cashier said with a sly look on his face that the usual commission is 45%, but they only take 40%, so Do-jun is at a loss. The employee said that if the brunette thought something was wrong, he could take them back, but no one would offer a higher price than they were asking, and the black-haired man hurried to take them back. Just as he was about to start gathering the stones, the cashier grabbed his arm to stop him because she still wanted to rip off this seemingly gullible fool. He said that the customer had to pay him for appraising the stones, plus 10,000 won for coffee and 30,000 for his work, so he should cough up the money. On top of that, he had to scrub the blood off the stones, which ruined another towel, so he owed 350,000 won plus the towel. When the brunette said he didn't have the money to pay and that it would be better for him to leave, Sir began to threaten that if he didn't betray them, he would be hurt. Because this exchange office is under the protection of several high-ranking heroes, it would be better for him to cooperate, and it turned out that the cashier was not joking. The thugs, of course, were noble bastards, each more handsome than the other, asking what had happened because if they had been called, then there really were problems. And now, the troubled young man was finished. One glance at the client's cold, emotionless eyes was enough to understand who was causing the problems and why they had started so abruptly. However, it seemed that it was the bouncer himself who was scared, not the young man who had caused him to be called. And now, a real mop-up operation was about to begin. The cashier hid behind the counter and most likely even managed to wet his pants when he saw his employer fall down like a tree that had just been cut down. What is it called? And what is a kitten? It became scary when your protector, whom you were hiding behind, was knocked down, and now you can only squeak, hoping for mercy. Even the highest-ranking heroes were useless against this seemingly superior young man who was able to knock all the bandits down at once. Now that the huge men are lying on the floor like seed husks, and the client they wanted to cheat is rubbing his hands, new terms of the deal can be discussed. Of course, he is not going to beat the cashier, as God has already punished him, and he has a business proposal for him that he simply has no right to refuse. The commission on the purchase of his stones is only 1%, and that's non-negotiable, so it's worth accepting his terms if he doesn't want to end up on the floor himself. Now that all the dots have been connected and the final price and commission percentage have been agreed upon, it's time to get down to business, as normal people do without cheating. With that settled, and now that justice has been restored and people will no longer be robbed of their last penny, they can part ways peacefully until next time. Do-jun brought home a huge wad of cash, probably more than his family had ever seen in their lives. And it was a huge shock for them. Seeing such a large amount of money, his grandmother and younger sister literally froze with their mouths open because it's suspicious when your grandson suddenly brings home such a stack of cash. Naturally, his grandmother immediately asked where her grandson had gotten such a large sum of money, and he decided that he needed to come up with a plausible excuse for the sake of the common good. So the young man said that his friend, to whom he had once lent money for business purposes, had repaid the debt, and the business had turned out to be such a successful venture that it had paid off. His grandmother was shocked to learn that her simple-minded grandson had such a friend, and the black-haired man thought about how he could get out of this situation and tell the truth. Do-jun simply said that his grandmother remembered where her grandson grew up, and that it was okay that he had been friends with this person back then, so it was not surprising that his friend had become a businessman. Grandma decided that since there was money, it was good, and her grandson would definitely not lie to her, so she could relax and no longer worry about food or housing. His little sister was very happy that they were now rich and kept asking her brother if they really had a lot of money to be happy about. Patting his little sister on the head, Do-jun said that now they were rich and everything would be fine, so his sister could enjoy her childhood as children should. The girl ran around the room, happy that no one would look down on them anymore because they had a lot of money just like everyone else. She did not know that her older brother had actually died, and that instead, the god of the sword from another world was now watching over her, remembering that he had met the sick Do-jun. He remembered that before he died, Do-jun had asked for one important thing, and it was his main wish that the dying young man had asked Karsarian for. He asked only one thing, that Karsarian make sure his grandmother and Eunyeon always lived in safety, and then the young man disappeared without waiting for his answer. Now Karsarian, who lived in Do-jun's body, fulfilled the promise made by this young man before his death and realized that he had literally become him. When he woke up, he found himself in the body of Do-jun, and now his outlook and personality had changed, so he had to do everything he was asked to do. At the moment, the safest house in South Korea costs about 11 billion won, and of course, he is not obliged to fulfill his promises, but there is one important thing. When his power returns, this amount of money will seem like dust because this world is a priori weaker than the one he lived in before, and which became familiar to him. Everything here is much weaker than his native world, just like the rifts in the gate, and the monsters are just dust compared to what was in the lost, destroyed world. For him, who was once the god of the sword, this world was just a playground with a sandbox and a game of stick fighting, which upset Do-jun, or more precisely, Karsarian, who now had not even a tenth of his full strength back. So he should be content with what he had, for there could have been nothing at all. The idyll was interrupted by a ringing male voice calling Do-jun. "Ask at the house if that young man is there now." He hurried to get up to check who had come. Leaving his family, the young man promised to deal with whoever had come, convincing his grandmother and sister that everything was fine and that he would be back soon, so they shouldn't worry. He approached the door and opened it, waiting to see who had come, interrupting his rest after hunting in the forest. He probably expected those who had come to collect debts. When he opened the door, he saw two burly men, one red-haired and the other blonde, who were waiting to get the money he owed them out of this weakling. The debt collectors made it clear that Do-jun owed them a huge amount of money and said that he should have paid them back earlier because debts should be repaid on time. He owed 48 million won, and Karsarian understood that these debt collectors had lent Do-jun money before his death, and the microloan amount had grown tenfold. They found out that Do-jun had gone abroad and earned a considerable amount of money there, and now they would take it all according to the contract, so he had better pay up. But, unfortunately, the black-haired man was in no hurry to part with the money because his fist immediately met the insolent face of the rot-toothed blonde freak. Probably none of them expected such a blow from the never soft-hearted young man, so even the red-haired strongman flew to the side like a bag of trash from the blow. The blow was perfectly placed, of course, so that the blonde, who was as thin as a reed, almost flew away from the force of the shockwave. Seeing such a reaction from the soft-spoken Do-jun, the blonde guy was shocked, expecting that now they would give him the money and beat him like the last creature. Karsarian, in Do-jun's body, said that he had already given more than 9 million, so now they owed him. He owed them, so what debts could there be? The blonde man was shocked by this reaction because, until then, he had only known Do-jun as a soft-hearted fool who was so weak that he couldn't stand up for himself. And the loan shark asked if the young man standing in front of him was really Do-jun because he certainly didn't remember anyone like him in his life. The black-haired man said that they should wait for his visit in a week because he would definitely not neglect them with his attention. And then he delivered the final blow to his face. Life continues in its normal sequence of peaceful everyday life, where people rejoice, not knowing what monsters are, because this life is for them to enjoy. Remembering the promise he made to the true Do-jun before his death, Karsarian fulfilled his promise and took his little sister to the mall. Little Eunyeon stood in front of a huge shelf of toys in the video and asked her brother if it was a dream that she could buy something new and beautiful. Do-jun replied that it was indeed so, and since they had already bought something, it was now her turn to choose whatever she wanted, so she should go ahead and choose. Karsarian inherited all of Do-jun's memories, and to be honest, it somehow revived his long-frozen heart, which was quite good news. Still, it was probably just simple empathy at the moment, but it was clear that the previous Do-jun was indeed a good person. It was clear how kind he was to his younger sister, Eunyeon. She was his half-sister, although they had different fathers but the same mother, so it was understandable. The main thing that someone whose life has been an endless struggle feels now is that he wants to protect this innocent soul, even if it is part of his promise to Do-jun. Finally, the little girl made up her mind and approached her brother, asking if she could buy a tiny white rabbit with small ears instead of a teddy bear. Her brother looked at the small toy, and realized that the girl had chosen it to save money because he had seen her hugging a huge bear but had taken a rabbit instead. Without saying a word, he pulled the huge teddy bear away in front of the surprised red-haired girl, who did not understand what her brother was doing. Dojun smiled and said that she should have taken it herself because he had told her to take what she really wanted and that money was not an issue now. The girl was very happy that her brother had really allowed her to buy such an expensive toy that they couldn't afford before, and she smiled brightly. Naturally, any small child would be delighted with delicious food, so her older brother took her to a cafe where they could share a delicious meal. After all, these were very pleasant, warm family moments that can only be spent with the closest relatives, but now they will be interrupted. He recognized that squeaky voice from a million others, and it addressed him with very unpleasant questions because it really did have a lot of complaints. A richly dressed but rather plump woman with light hair came in and looked reproachfully at the young Dojun as if he were some kind of cockroach. With a condescending expression on her face, the woman, who at first glance seemed pretty, asked why he was dressed like that because he didn't look like a special person at all. She also asked who the little brat sitting with him was and whether she had also done something like his mother in the past, and that it wasn't worth it for that pig to say such things. The mention of his mother made the young man push his chair back and stand up, and he probably even wanted to spit on the security guards who had come with this fat bitch. Due to her childish innocence and inexperience, Yoon did not understand who this woman was and why she had a problem with her brother. But it was good that her brother knew how to talk. Of course, he paused for a decent amount of time before starting the conversation, deciding that it wasn't worth getting into a conflict right away because it was a crowded place. The woman continued to look down on him and his younger sister, assessing the quality of the clothes they were wearing, waiting for the moment when she could make a snide remark. The girl looked at her, not understanding what was going on and why this woman was picking on her brother, since they hadn't done anything wrong to anyone. The blonde asked the little girl her name, and the innocent child replied that her name was Lee Yoon-young, and that surname told the blonde a lot. Lee was the surname given by her mother, and she said that the girl was dressed like a homeless person, so she was just as dirty and flea-ridden as her mother, which was not surprising. She probably expected her brother to swallow it and not speak up, thinking that his silence was a sign of agreement, but it was clear that his blood was boiling. During his lifetime, Karkarian most likely did not tolerate such arrogant freaks as this rich aunt, so he restrained himself from lashing out right there in front of the child. However, this fat hag was not going to let them get away with it and decided to take it out on the little girl who did not deserve such treatment, since her brother was silent. Looking at the little child as if she had either stolen her husband or destroyed her entire house, the fat woman asked if the little girl knew one important thing. The lowest thing you can say to a child is something nasty about their parents. So this fat hag decided to take it out on the child, saying she was the daughter of a slut. At this point, even Dojun's nerves would have given way, and his new incarnation would have been even more so. And now this fat beast would have to expect a really harsh response. The blonde wasn't expecting any response, but then Dojun said, "Excuse me, bitch, your daughter is as ugly as a real orc, and God, how right he was." The fat woman, hearing how he called her, turned around, sweating profusely, when she heard that the once quiet young man had called her such a nasty word, and for what reason. The thing is, how cruel was the past of that very Dojun, and what horrors did this once simple and gentle man go through? The fact is that Dojun is an outcast through no fault of his own, because he is an illegitimate son and lived in poverty when his mother died and his father took the 7-year-old boy into his family. However, he was not loved there. He was an outcast who lived a decade of his life in neglect and abuse, and when his stepmother gave birth to a son, Dojun was made to understand that he was surplus to requirements. After that, the little boy was simply thrown out of the house and forced to move in with his maternal grandmother and half-sister. That is the story. So Dojun is truly a bright person with a difficult fate, who has had so much shit happen to him that anyone else would have broken down, but he held on bravely. Cartesian couldn't understand how such a tormented, soft heart could withstand all the cruel trials that befell this unfortunate young man. But from now on, everything will be completely different because he will no longer allow anyone to walk all over him, and everyone who has hurt him will pay dearly for their sins, especially that fat pig, whom the brunette said they had lived with for a decade, but she was still so ugly and disgusting, like a pig, an ugly woman. Not only does she have a face like a brick and the body of a pig, but she also has a nasty temper and is so stupid that she dropped out of school because she didn't have enough brains to even master the basics. The security guards who heard this wanted to intervene, but when they heard about her inferiority complex towards other women, they immediately fell silent in surprise. She really hates girls and women who are much prettier, smarter, and kinder than her, which is why she bullies this little girl so much. This fat bitch has no right to humiliate a little girl who has a heart and soul several times bigger than hers because she cares for her older brother. Of course, this was a scene that no one expected to see in an ordinary public building, but this conversation was bound to happen between them sooner or later. When the fat girl heard how accurately her father's illegitimate son described her, she was really shocked, but she couldn't say anything in her defense. Even the security guards did not rush to her defense. But then someone came who no one expected, greeting Do-jun, because they had not seen each other for a very long time. It turned out to be the mother of the overweight girl, who, upon seeing her mother, rushed to her to complain about how cruelly the boy had treated her. But she forgot to mention that she had humiliated his sister, mother, and all women who were better than her. However, as soon as his mother heard the complaint, she immediately told her to shut up. This beautiful blonde woman immediately shut her daughter up, saying that she should calm down because she was behaving like a spoiled brat. In contrast to this arrogant girl, the beautiful blonde woman immediately asked in a soft, insinuating voice how Do-jun was doing in life in general. Putting on an act of being a kind and caring woman, she asked why he wasn't coming home. But it was all a lie because she was the one who had tormented him for a dozen years of his life. The golden-haired snake clearly hit a sore spot for Do-jun, telling him how his father, who was no fool, was so worried about him, but she was sick of him. She probably expected him to remain silent and leave as usual, but that was not the case. He abruptly approached her and, looming over her like a black figure, said the following. He told the blonde to her face that she was a nobody to him and that he had no desire to talk to her, so they should both get lost. The blonde was probably expecting to mock the poor young man, but he beat her to it, making her look like a complete fool in front of the huge crowd. All this bravado about her daughter being uncultured was just a cover for her rotten nature and her desire to humiliate the young man, because now she was truly humiliated. This was definitely not the Do-jun she knew before, because before, you could hit this boy for no reason, and he would look down and remain silent. But now he was so sharp. The little fat pig asked her mother to wait because she wanted to leave with her. In fact, they both had a whole bucket of shit poured on them, which was absolutely deserved. Do-jun, even though he was no longer quite himself, was able to stand up for his younger sister, for himself, and for his late mother, so he said that it would be better for them to leave. The girl agreed, but he knew that the Do-jun, who meekly bowed his head and endured insults, no longer existed, so the meat for the offenders began. Meanwhile, the rich stepmother and her fat, bitchy daughter were already rushing home from the mall, humiliated and ashamed, so much so that they were both filled with anger. The bitchy fat blonde was not satisfied with her mother's questions about why she left and did nothing, because she should have crushed that little bastard instead of keeping quiet. The woman did not listen to her daughter's whining about how her husband's illegitimate son had called her, and simply addressed Manager Lee with a question. She asked directly why that bastard, so Do-jun was still alive. After all, they were supposed to get rid of him right at the beginning, near the gate, which revealed the truth. It turned out that it was her plan for this young man to be left behind the gate all alone, and a certain Kang Chul had brought him there and left him there as planned. He didn't know what happened next, but that wasn't the point. She was interested in why someone who should have died long ago was still breathing. The evening of confessions was in full swing, because it turned out that this beauty was even worse than her daughter, who didn't understand why her stepbrother had to die, and most importantly, for what. The girl was certainly a fat bitch, but she couldn't have thought of doing such a thing to her hated older brother, because he hadn't done anything wrong to her personally. Probably the fact that he was born, but that's her mother's problem. And it seems that the girl does have a soul or the beginnings of one, because she asked what the hell her mother was doing. It turns out that this little girl, as could be seen from her behavior, was still in love with Do-jun, but she denied it with her sarcasm and behavior. The girl immediately began to deny that she had any feelings for this, as she said, nobody, because it was not like that at all. She did not love him at all. But you can't hide the truth from a mother's eyes, and she immediately shut her up, forcing her fat daughter to be quiet, because the mother decides everything as always, even though it's clear that she's the one. It was clear that the woman had really lost her mind because she wanted to get rid of a person who, in essence, had done nothing to her, but perhaps was simply born. Moreover, he was born to her husband's son, which she could not forgive, and even for her fat daughter, it was a real horror, because she was asked not to interfere in her mother's affairs. He dared to be rude to her instead of keeping quiet as usual, acknowledging his status as nothing more than trash under her feet, and since he was rude to her, he was definitely doomed. Now this bitchy blonde will make sure that the boy she hates disappears from this world as if he had never existed and was just a collective hallucination. The whole situation with the rift began a decade ago, because that was when rift zones appeared in the Earth's crust, anomalous sources from which it all began. On that same day, monsters began to emerge from them and exterminate all the people who were lucky enough to be in their path, and so the world plunged into the horror of eternal agony. What was once called the world eventually fell under the pressure of a new danger and burned in the fire of the apocalypse and destruction caused by the creatures and monsters from the rift. However, the end was not so close because one fine day, heroes appeared and subjugated the monsters, and it was they who started the world system. And that's when I appeared, and now the whole world lives on. The heroes became the ones who began to defeat the monsters and extract magical stones from their bodies, which triggered a metamorphosis. When the magic stones became a new source of energy for the countries of the world, they cooperated to turn the rift into a gateway, and now all industry revolves around it. Therefore, in order to survive and feed himself and his family, he will become a hero who can truly show them what real monster hunting is. Gates and heroes are the new agenda, so in order to earn a living in this world, he is destined to become a hero, which is what I am going to do. Updated beyond recognition, So Do-jun. Now he has arrived in a place called the capital of Yeondeung, according to HCS, where his journey into a new life will begin. But first, let's deal with the loans. They wanted to get money out of him when they found out that he had signed up to be a hero and was defeating monsters. Oh, as it turned out, this young man beat them to it by arriving at the lair first. Naturally, the leader of the gang of loan sharks, who clearly had a grudge against the young man, was waiting for him, and now he's finishing his cigarette. Yes, the showdown is about to begin. Beaten up, with broken noses and covered in bruises, the loan sharks asked what the hell this freak was doing here, hiding behind the leader, thinking that nothing would happen to them. So Do-jin behaved with dignity, showing no emotion in his posture or even on his face, because now he was the one dictating the terms, not them. The leader asked what the hell this freak was doing here after beating up 3 of his guys, and how he still had the nerve to come here and act like he was the boss. So Do-jin said that no matter how you look at it, the arrogance of these loan sharks seriously surprised him, and the creditors asked what arrogance he was talking about and why it surprised him so much. The brunette said in all seriousness that he was entitled to compensation for the moral, physical, and material damage caused by these jerks earlier from the loan sharks. The leader was surprised at how such a docile guy in the past had become such a formidable wolf who, as could be seen, beat all his guys with particular cruelty. Observing the young man, the not-so-stupid man realized that this boy had most likely been to the gates and experienced a so-called rebirth and gained courage. The leader was struck by his confidence, which showed that he had been reborn and awakened less than a week ago, and was already so cocky and ready to show the braggart his place in the world. The leader quickly called in more loan sharks, who, upon arriving, decided to show the young man that he was in for a really good beating for his insolence. The very fact that he had called so many strong guys meant that a serious fight could now begin. But as you can see, the brunette didn't care about them. The leader of this gang decided that he had won, and that they would now deal with this insolent young man. But the last word now belonged not to him, but to So Do-jun. The man was already about to leave, putting on his raincoat, but as expected, the formidable team was about to make him sit down on his ass, because now he was no longer the one dictating the terms. So Do-jun paused for a moment before giving his main command, which would put such a cocky jerk as the leader of this gang in his place. And then, to the ears of the man who had already decided that he had won and that now this jerk would give him all the money, as well as compensation for the beating, he heard that he was being surrounded. This young jerk, whose only achievement was breaking down the so-called gate, told him that he'd better sit down because Do-jin was speaking. One of his henchmen, a bespectacled thug, said that a snot-nosed kid like Do-jin had no moral right to talk to their boss like that, and that he was going to beat everything out of him. However, the brunette didn't even raise an eyebrow, carefully taking the bridge of the bully's glasses between his fingertips, hinting that a much warmer welcome awaited him. And then, in front of the surprised crowd, the seemingly slight skinny kid punched his huge counterpart in the face, knocking him down to take a break. It was certainly impressive to see such a seemingly insignificant, small-built kid deliver such powerful blows to huge men. But the fact remained. A series of well-aimed hard blows followed, because now it was So Do-jun who would dictate how to behave with him, since he knew everything. It turns out that he knows about the company's shady dealings, and that, in addition to extortion, they also forge documents for those who took out loans and speculate. And in order to start working, he needs a hero's certificate, which of course he will not receive if he has so many dead weights on his shoulders. And with such a vile gang as this, he can deal with them in no time, even with only a small percentage of his former strength, so no blow is scary. At this rate, soon there was nothing left of the huge gang of thugs except for the bodies lying knocked out on the floor, and he showed that he would not tolerate it. In front of the leader's eyes, his entire gang was knocked out, and all he could do was silently watch the events unfold. So Do-jun, as if it were normal for him to give orders to people, told them to slowly make him the perfect document certifying him as a hero. He would not accept any sloppy work, because there should be no problems in the future, and the deadline for the document to be delivered to his door was tomorrow, and he was waiting. Now, finally, everyone was convinced that there was not even a hint of the previous soft-hearted brat left, and that they were facing a truly dangerous enemy with the power of God. You can't really fight against that, and the leader immediately realized that this wasn't even a low-level power, not even a mid-level one, but a power close to the top, rank B, which is unreal. Since he was now dictating the terms, he asked his declared lackeys if they understood what he had said, waiting for an answer that would convince him completely. No one argued with him because it was dangerous. He still had a couple of questions for the leader of this pack of vile, trembling jackals. And he wanted to know if his stepmother, Hong Hee-ju, had really given this man the order to get rid of So Do-jin himself, literally ordering his killer. And now the leader himself felt something warm and thin running down his legs. And God, he was afraid of such an influential woman, but he couldn't lie either. After his rebirth, So Do-jin had become a true berserker, who would probably even resort to torture now to get the answer he needed. The man screamed in pain, feeling as if iron clamps were digging into his skin, and his brain was probably experiencing the most terrible pain in his long life. Even his most loyal henchmen understood that now their leader would indeed give up the most important confession, which would surely cost them all their heads one day. The second man remained silent, still remembering how badly he had been beaten. His head remembered the pain echoing dully in the back of his head, and he did not want a repeat performance. The leader yelled that Hong Hee-ju had originally ordered him to have his men finish off So Do-jin, driving him to commit suicide. That's what the damn bitch said. So since he had fulfilled his part of the deal, let the cruel man now release him from the pain of his fingers on him. Now Do-jin knew perfectly well that it was this man who had locked him in the gate, trying to drive him to despair and an unforgivable place of no return. Well, as they say, what was supposed to break him didn't break him. It gave him a push. But the leader denied that he knew anything about the gate and that he definitely didn't lock him up. The man was telling the truth because if his target had died, he certainly would not have received any money from him, which was, of course, a pragmatic and mercenary answer. It was an answer that, in principle, could not be refuted. So the brunette thought for a second about what to do now with this groveling rat who so desperately did not want to die. So he gave this once formidable man, whom he feared, the task of finding a certain person named Kang Chul-woo, because this guy was involved in everything. Do-jun ordered him to immediately find all the information about this man by tomorrow and bring it to him. So he got up and brought the beaten boy and the underground boss. The main thing was that no one argued, and now this weakling, who had once groveled at their feet, had become the one who set the conditions for their survival in the world and beyond. Now that he occupies So Do-jin's body, Karzarian must do everything as requested by the young man with a kind heart before his disappearance. The main thing he asked for was that the stronger man reborn in his body take care of his sister and grandmother so that they could live in safety, and that he alone would do so. Only he could do anything now, so he promised to figure it out all by himself in order to fulfill the dying Do-jun's will as he had promised. In less than 5 minutes, he already had the hero's ID in his hands, but so far it looked quite presentable. It remained to be tested in action. Leaning it against the automatic card reader, Jin waited for confirmation that he could enter, and it seemed that everything had worked out as it should for success. The system confirmed that his identity was in the database, but there was one snag related to the level of those who entered the gates, and it could be dangerous. The fact is that these gates can be very dangerous, so you need to think twice before always entering, and the bastards from the credit agency entered the wrong rank. No matter how low he is still stronger than any piece of paper can show, so in principle, there is nothing to fear if you know the whole strategy well and have strength. The rank of the one who entered is B, the scale is D, the terrain is a tunnel, his recommendation for safety is rank A, and the entrance is recommended for no more than 2 people at a time, but he doesn't care. Even with his rank, with such a scale and high-level gates, it can be difficult alone, and the gates will be harder to clear if the rank is not as high. Because here, literally every kilometer, monsters are waiting who are already hungry for human flesh, and if you're unlucky, you can run into a couple of them yourself. More precisely, you can meet 100 of them, but that doesn't scare a man like So-jun because he has seen all kinds of shit in his life. And now there's a viper in front of him, reaching out to attack, but he doesn't really care, because it'll be fun. And that's just what he's in the mood for right now. He's tired of these weak enemies who are just big, but in reality are just empty piles of meat. He needs an enemy who is more interesting. And this snake really looks convincing because with such a creature, you can cut down as many crystals as possible, which are of a much higher level than before. The snake certainly looks impressive, but she has encountered a truly incredible enemy with a power that has never been seen in this world before. Its attacks were just a way for him to tickle his nerves. Even if it was the most poisonous creature, he would tear its jaws to shreds with such a move. Her venom is truly dangerous to humans and is known to cause instant and irreversible paralysis of the entire body and internal organs at once, which is a death sentence. Du Jun knows perfectly well from Karzerian's memory that this is a deadly black viper whose venom is so effective that even a single drop will cause paralysis. Therefore, one must take care not to get even the slightest scratch, but in principle, he has nothing to fear from its speed of movement and attack. Let the viper fear that her death hour will come from such a precise strike to any vital organ, because the strikes really know their target. Dujun is truly capable of developing tremendous speed that cannot be compared to any of the creatures previously seen by the snake in the cave. He is capable of moving at all speeds, avoiding direct contact with the poison on his body, and not a single scratch has touched him so far, which was a very good sign. In the end, the snake was defeated, and the only evidence of a rather tense battle was a glove covered in snake venom from top to bottom. How can I put it? This thing was worth the money, and it was a lot of money that was spent on its purchase. So he was pleased with how the artifact performed in battle. He relaxed too soon because it was not worth underestimating the enemy, and it was worth paying attention to the fact that the snake was not going to die just like that. Where there had been one head, there were now three, which meant more area to attack, more running around, but also more fun in battle. There was no point in getting upset for too long, and thanks to the snake's mutation in a second, nothing remained of its heads, which was basically no match for Dojun. In that same second, the snake was reduced to bright green drops of poisonous slime scattered across the walls, a sign that it had been torn to pieces. The poison itself flew around the cave like New Year's fireworks during a performance, showing that this man was truly a master of his craft. In the end, the snake was torn apart, and it was time to extract the magic stone from its body, but there was a catch in that this snake was not valued here in principle. There was not a single magic stone in it, not even the most insignificant one. Just like in his past world, the probability of getting a stone from such a viper was negligible. In order to get any benefit from these creatures, you need to kill not one or two, because the probability of getting something valuable is really negligible. Therefore, in order to get anything at all, you would have to kill at least a couple hundred of them so that the 3% chance would pay off and the effort would not be wasted. Probably many heroes before him tried to defeat this dungeon, but only rotting skeletons remained on the floor as a reminder not to go there, or you will die. The decomposing corpse emitting a foul odor would have frightened anyone, but not this psychopath, who decided that since he had come here, he would only leave as the victor. So Dujin immediately realized that this place was the way out of the cave, which most of those who decided to compete with the creatures of the tunnel were not destined to overcome. However, another surprise awaited him there. A poisonous snake, just as deadly as the previous one, but much larger, so he would have to jump around a lot. But there was nothing he could do. He was still looking for a way out and didn't know where to go. But if he could defeat the boss, he would finally have the moral right to leave. So far, everything was going as well as possible, and it seemed that he would be able to defeat the boss easily, but that was not the case. It turned out that the boss's scales were much stronger. He couldn't just smash its head in, so he had to use a lot more ingenuity to avoid being burned to ashes forever. His blow only left a fist mark on the armor, so the adventurer understood perfectly well that he needed to finish off this creature as quickly as possible and get out of there. Although he tried to break through the scales, it was a little more difficult than with a simple viper, so he would have to work hard because he had slightly overestimated himself at the beginning. In the end, pressed against the wall, he pretended to be defeated, allowing the snake to feel superior and attack for a crushing blow in the end. The snake sensed that its opponent was probably exhausted and cornered, so it rushed to attack and poison his body, but that was Dujin's plan. The moment the snake approached him, bearing its poisonous fangs, the young man immediately jumped out of the way and ran away from the collision to deliver a targeted attack. Now the main thing was to run at full speed to get there before the snake and not die here like those poor wretches whose bodies were scattered on the floor like toys. He continued to methodically strike the hard body, but it seemed that no blow could harm this monster. My god, what kind of creature is this? So Dujin immediately noticed that the snake was indeed impervious to any blows, and that he was essentially fighting a shadow, which greatly unsettled him. The blows were useless, and as he thought, the boss would be on a completely different level compared to the snakes inside, because its scales were hard and fists would not help. He needs to think quickly about what to do, because he doesn't have the previous strength that could help him deal with it in no time. But he needs to look carefully, because there may be items around that were not needed by the previous owner, but now they may be more useful to you than ever. And even though they are as ancient as the world itself, there is no choice. If you don't take the fallen warrior's sword, he will definitely die. So it's better to endure 5 minutes of shame and survive, even with old weapons, but get out alive. Of course, it's disgusting to touch something that was literally lying next to a dead body and is saturated with a substance called corpse poison, but there is no choice. You have to take it. It's old, but still much more effective than what he has in his hands, no matter how ancient the sword is. It all depends on the strength of its owner, and the owner here is not weak, as we can see. It is true that only the owner determines the sword, not the iron of the blade. And indeed, he is the only one who can now somehow influence the situation. Therefore, after asking for forgiveness and permission to take the sword out of respect for the fallen warrior, So Jin decided to engage in a serious battle with a strong enemy. Since he has a sword, he has a much better chance of piercing the thick scales than if he were fighting with his bare hands, even if he were wearing armored gloves. For this, Vasilisk must be a true honor, and a hero like him will now be the one to tear her to pieces so that she is just a pathetic, groveling viper. She will meet her death at the hilt of the sword that pierces her centuries-old scales. And he, Jin, will be the first in history to leave here, avenging everyone. In fact, the snake had only seconds left to live, but even now it continues to press on with its venom, desperately fighting for its insignificant existence. In the end, the one who was so eager to survive and destroy the snake came to his end because the snake finally breathed its last breath and went limp. In principle, there could be no other outcome to the battle because the one who was now fighting the snake was truly a great man who was knee-deep in the storm. Of course, the sword broke due to its ancient origin and age, but it was nice that the brunette was still able to destroy the snake. Otherwise, it would have been very disappointing. However, even such a lousy creature could be useful if the blade was pulled out of its mortal body, and perhaps it could still be worked on in the future. Of course, it is really short compared to a normal blade of its diameter, but with some effort, it could be a truly formidable weapon for fighting the enemy. Of course, it will take much more work than in Namsen, but in principle, he is even lucky, and in principle, he has not practiced for a long time and needs to improve his skills. No one would have thought that clearing the B rank gate alone would take so much time. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. In principle, it's already time to go home and not hang around here. Having spent so much time in the dungeon, Jun was really exhausted, so he needed to think about how to regain his strength before the next battle. Otherwise, he could simply die of exhaustion. Of course, it was disappointing that he had deteriorated so much, but what could be expected from a simple human body at the beginning of his life's journey? He should be thankful that his former comrades died early enough not to see him in such a pitiful state. Otherwise, they would have laughed at him heartily. And again, the same agency that buys up magic crystals first lures people in with the lowest interest rates and then robs them. And again, the same scenario. A person comes in, brings crystals, they name a price, he pays a huge commission, and they agree on a deal that is convenient for the agency. The commission is again 40%, even though there were quite a lot of stones and they were all of very high quality, but the commission is really very high, so it's outrageous. The man said that the commission was too high and that he was a regular customer, so for the sake of propriety, they could give him a discount as a valued customer. The cashier began to justify himself, saying that he should have known that they had the lowest commission among their competitors and that the basic commission was at a minimum of 5%. In addition, they do not keep records of transactions so that customers do not have to pay taxes. And considering the above, it is possible to make clean transactions with a favorable commission. The man decided that, well, if they said so, he wouldn't argue, but there was one thing that surprised him greatly, even though he got his money. The adventurer also asked why the cashier looked so terrible, as if his head had been smashed in, and the man had a brilliant story in response. The cashier said that some psychopath had come in and simply knocked all the security guards half to death, and he got a generous dose of punishment for his audacity. The visitor was shocked by this story and thought that the security of their establishment should be sufficient, and that the first thing to look at is skills. Because if you only look at rank, you can make a big mistake, because skills do not always go hand in hand with rank. Rank can be bought, and the old man began to lecture. The old man continued to tell the cashier, as if he were his grandson, that warriors should be chosen based on their skills, and that if any questions arose, they should call him. As they say, he remembered the madman, and then his shiny red boots appeared, reminding him of what they had done to his face last time for such rotten talk. One glance at that haughty face, black hair, and empty amber eyes was enough to experience fear, comparable to death, from a stroke. The beaten cashier immediately recognized this visitor as the very same kid who had beaten him to death. But by some miracle, he had survived and ended up outside the gates in the slop bucket. The cashier immediately started yelling that this was the same damn bastard who had beaten him up last time, pointing his finger at the young man who was such a psychopath. The customer couldn't believe that such a handsome, tall guy had caused such a mess here, but his cute face wouldn't save him from being held accountable for his actions. The gullible man immediately decided that since the hero had beaten up the innocent cashier, he should now be punished for raising his hand against a civilian. The cashier already thought that now someone would take revenge for him because the hero had about 7 years of experience and good connections, so if there was a commotion here, it would hurt. Jin coldly said that the old man should just get lost and mind his own business, and the cashier was, of course, shocked by the brunette's insolence. The visitor was shocked by such insolence and rudeness, but in principle, The exchange employee expected that such a rude reaction would provoke the experienced warrior to aggression. Do-jin calmly asked, with a hint of phlegmaticness in his voice, if this brave warrior wanted to take revenge for the beaten and unfortunate cashier. Then, since he was so brave, let him try to beat him up, because everyone is good with words. But when it comes to showing themselves in action, their pants immediately get wet. The man knew that the main cause of death for heroes was not often monsters, but fights with other heroes. So he said that they would meet next time. He said he had things to do and couldn't deal with this right now. And now the cashier himself realized that no one would protect him from this crazy psychopath with amber eyes. And this psychopath with a beautiful face asks him so many questions that he can't say them to his face but whispers like a rat. Probably the poor cashier expected that he would be beaten up again. But Do-jin took a bag full of red stones and threw it at him. But this time they were clean. Thank God he at least washed off the blood, and thank God these weren't the same low-quality fragments as last time, so they would be worth much more money. These were incredibly high-quality stones, so the unfortunate employee wondered who this mysterious man in front of him was, whether he was even human at all. All that remained was to do some quick calculations, and this time, forgetting about the draconian commission he had charged the previous buyer, but they wouldn't let him off that easily. The stones were worth 150 million won, which was a pretty decent amount, at least 30 times more than last time with the simple stones. Do-jin decided to mock the insolent cashier, saying that he had been hunting all day for only 150 million won, and that he should give it to him. However, the unfortunate cashier said that a commission still had to be deducted, and said this under the intense gaze of amber eyes that pierced him through and through. The poor guy already thought he had said something wrong, but he was reminded that the commission was only 1%, so he had 148,500,000 in his hands. So let him bring them here, and the cashier wanted to shout that the commission was 40%, as they had said before, but in real life he probably just mumbled quietly. The cashier said that for transactions over 100 million, he had to get permission from management, but there was no way to get through to the visitor. Then let him get it immediately if necessary, because he is not going to wait until their shambolic office gives him everything he has earned through honest labor. Forgetting his former pride and dignity, the cashier called his boss to report that an unforeseen situation had arisen and mumbled into the phone like a beaten kitten. Do-jin snatched the phone from the unfortunate cashier's hands to speak to the boss himself and explain why he was harassing his employee. Do-jin picked up the phone and told the boss in a commanding tone that he had to bring him the money immediately, otherwise there would be problems. And nobody wanted that. Now the boss understood everything and asked the visitor to hand the phone back to his employee. But the brunette had no intention of handing the phone back to the insolent cashier. At that very moment, the unfortunate cashier's phone landed behind his head, literally smashing the glass to smithereens, and luckily not the young man's head. Do-jun told the cashier that the boss said he understood everything and that he should quickly give him the money so that they wouldn't do the same thing to his head as they did to the phone. No one dared to argue with this psychopath, so they handed over the maximum amount of money, even though it was divided into many different bags. As he left, Do-jin offered a sarcastic, mocking smile and suggested that next time they do business without any problems. But the unfortunate cashier said that it doesn't work without problems. As soon as the shop doors closed behind this psychopath named Do-jun, the unfortunate cashier was able to breathe a sigh of relief and felt that this freak had already left and he was safe. 10 minutes later, the boss came down and yelled at his employee, saying that he wasn't answering the phone and that he had already called him several times, but there was no answer or greeting. The boss had no idea what the call was about. And then the cashier said that he really wanted to quit and asked his boss for protection in a very indirect way. The boss saw the broken phone in the same battered wall and realized that it was all because of that psychopathic visitor who had driven the employee to a breakdown. He understood perfectly well that someone had severely intimidated his cashier and realized that it was the same black-haired smiling psychopath with bags of money at the exit who had done the job. One glance at the employee, who was shaking like a leaf in the autumn wind, was enough to understand that the poor guy had really been pushed over the edge. The boss didn't wait long and called Ju Yan to come and deal with the freak who was terrorizing the store for the umpteenth time, since she was a high-ranking employee. Ju Yan didn't keep them waiting long before she showed up at the store and went to help her uncle, because if they called her, it meant something really bad had happened. It was clear that she was a star, as people parted before her as if God himself had descended to earth, and not without reason, because she was also a heroine of sorts. Her name has been on everyone's lips for a long time, and it is clear that every dog here knows her as a great heroine of the highest rank, who, as they say, is knee-deep in the sea. Her sharp features and large, expressive eyes, matching her bright purple hair the color of fresh lavender, speak of cold beauty, calmness, and a complex personality. And she is indeed that complex personality who is about to cause a commotion in the shop where they dared to break the rules established by her dear uncle a long time ago. When the cashier saw who had come in, he guessed without a word or a glance that it was Miss Hyun-ju Young herself, the legendary heroine known for being on the list of the first. She is a C-rank heroine in Korea, just a pretty girl with purple hair picked up off the street, and what's more, she is the boss's niece. So what is she doing here? Of course, such an important person would not just come to their office for no reason, which means that the boss personally summoned her for some particularly important purpose in question. So, it seems that some insolent hero has appeared in the area who has decided that he can now dictate new terms and rip off their shop as he sees fit. The girl immediately understood that she had been summoned here because of some hero who was extorting money from her uncle without commission, and her head began to ache. In general, she is now waiting for details. It seems that over time, the life of Do-jun himself, his younger sister, and indeed the whole family has improved, and he can essentially provide them with everything they need to be happy. While his younger sister enjoys her childhood and plays with the toys she dreamed of, Do-jun tries to improve his physical skills through meditation. He realizes that earning 100 million won a day is not enough compensation for such colossal work and that he needs to rise in the dungeon ranks. He needs to urgently fight alone at the highest level, but first he needs to get rid of the fatigue and stiffness in his body and mind. To do this, he needed to immediately restore his former strength, but how could he do that with his weak body because any overexertion would tear him apart? The problem was that, unlike in his former world, his magical homeland, there was no mana to be found in the atmosphere, which was the main obstacle and, in essence, the nail in the coffin of his development. This really slows down the process because if you collect mana every day, it will take 3 years, maybe even more. First, you need good equipment and weapons, but there is one thing. In this real world, even the crappiest equipment will cost hundreds of millions, and that means working for more than a week or a month. But something interrupted his long thoughts. His reaction speed kicked in, and the first thing he had to do was get his little sister out of there, because right now, something could happen that would literally kill the child. Grabbing his sister by the scruff of her neck as quickly as possible, along with her toys, her brother dragged her into the house, shouting for Yoonyeon to go inside immediately because it was too dangerous for her to play outside alone. The little brown-haired girl still tried to resist and break free, but her brother explained that it was too dangerous for her here now and that he had to deal with something. Grandma didn't understand why her brother was shoving his sister into the house so abruptly and came out to ask him what had happened that had made him so alarmed. The brunette pushed the girl into the house and stood silently, and the grandmother immediately understood that he was not accidentally so frightened because the whole house was shaking beneath them. This could only mean that a terrible earthquake had begun, or that it was something completely different that these people did not yet understand and should not understand. Do-jun, as they say, had seen it all before and immediately realized that this was definitely not an earthquake, but something more serious that could not be escaped by simply taking shelter. It was a phenomenon known in this world as a rift between spaces, and it had chosen their home as the next passageway between worlds. Well, they say that nowadays, disasters happen when space breaks down so much that even the safest place can become a wormhole, from which only death can be expected. Do-jun, as the only one who could somehow influence the situation, hurried to lock his relatives in the house and take action. Naturally, his relatives did not understand what was happening and panicked, but their protector, both brother and grandson, said that it was dangerous outside and asked them to wait for him inside the house. As always, work was in full swing in such a busy place as the Heroes Association. Right in the middle of the capital, in the middle of the glorious city of Seoul, where people were already up in arms because of the rift. All the higher-ups and even the secondary bosses and workers were on high alert because a new rift between two universes had been discovered in the Mapo district. Over the past 2 months or so, this new rift has been causing more and more so-called space ruptures, leading to huge casualties among the civilian population. The leader immediately gave the order to contact the White Lion Guild, which is closest to the area, and urgently send other heroes. The more people there are now, the better, so everyone needs to be called. But first of all, it is necessary to know where the location of the rift has been recorded, and this is generally frightening, because the location of the rupture is a residential building, which complicates the situation even more. If an ordinary person enters the rupture, it will be impossible for others to enter until that person comes out. And it's even scarier if that person dies there, because the waves of monsters won't stop for a decade. So we need to act as quickly as possible. This scenario cannot be allowed to happen because once this diabolical mechanism is set in motion, it cannot be stopped, which will lead to the complete destruction of the capital. And it's not just Seoul that will be affected, but this inscription could spread beyond Korea, putting the entire world in danger and the fate of the earth in the hands of this office. It was necessary to identify the hero or person who entered there, and thank God they did it. His name is So Do-jun, and his grandmother reported that he entered the rift. According to the elderly woman, he entered the zone only to save his sister, so he is most likely not a hero, and the probability of monsters appearing is increasing. In general, the probability that after this man's death, a real flood of monsters will begin in Korea and then the whole world is almost 100%. Meanwhile, Hong Hee-ju received a detailed report on what is happening in the world, and she probably won't like it very much now because her target is alive and well. The whole paradox is that the one who should have died long ago and accepted the fact that he is not wanted in this world has awakened his unexpected power. The bitchy blonde certainly couldn't allow that because, even though he is not listed in the Heroes Association registry, he awakened during his visit to the gate. And then there was that dirty bastard Kang Chul-woo, who didn't even complete the task properly, which is why the golden-haired client was now expressing her disapproval with such fury. She didn't understand at all why the hell he had to complicate everything so much, confuse things, and take money for it. So she had to tell Kang Chul-woo the following. Moreover, she would have to pay 10 times the amount she had paid him, but the assistant said that it was unlikely that they would be able to contact him now. The blonde didn't understand what kind of stupid excuse this was, but the assistant explained that there was a new crack in the Mapo area in Do-jun's house, and that they would have to report it soon. This basically takes all responsibility off their shoulders because they won't have to get their hands dirty. This creature will die on its own and will no longer be a nuisance, just like the family. This was a gift from God because they wouldn't have to dirty their hands with such a vile individual, and he would take his family with him to the grave. Hong Hee-ju ordered her subordinate to monitor the area until he was sure that the scum named Seo Do-jun was finally dead. He found himself completely barefoot and naked in the middle of an unfamiliar area. Of course, only Seo Do-jun couldn't understand what kind of forest this was, but his past life knew. But in his previous life, this place was familiar as never before, because he had spent most of his life here as a Karzerian, and the event seemed unreal to everyone. It all seemed truly incredible, because it was the same forest where he had spent his life back when his native world was not threatened by anything from outside. Even as a small child from birth, Karzerian spent time here every day enjoying and relaxing in the shade of eternal deciduous and coniferous trees. The very shape of the forest, the trees, the grass, the wind, and even the atmosphere rich in mana and the view of the clouds were all so identical that it seemed like a crazy dream. And most likely, the way out of this area would be on the path right in front of him. And if that was indeed the case, then the great tree would be there. It was this tree that started the irreversible process of destroying the homeland. And it was from this tree that the period of decay began, which led to the arrival of monsters there. There it was, the World Tree, from whose rift a stream of pure mana always flowed. It was such an ancient tree that it was impossible to describe its true age. Karzerian, like no one else, could determine its age, for his sense of mana was a unique skill that no one else in the human world of Earth could boast of. Thanks to this tree, the world that was the true home of man was destroyed, turning Korea upside down and back again with its rebirth alone. The very reason his world was destroyed was precisely because this tree was burned, and the flow of pure mana eventually exhausted itself. But for now, the tree was still intact. He didn't understand why, but since he had been given a new body, Karzerian had to use everything to the maximum to save the mana. He couldn't let something as important as mana disappear, so it was now his sacred duty to bring back the mana of the time of heroes and magic. Therefore, he now needed to subdue his flesh and mind in the name of a great goal that could save the whole world, and probably not only this world, but an endless chain of others. Therefore, now he must concentrate as much as possible on ensuring that his flesh, its desires, fatigue, and such familiar human desires as sleep, water, and rest recede. Therefore, Seo Do-jun forgot what carnal desires in the usual human world were, because the soul had to strive for spiritual heights and purity. So he spent 10 days sitting in a tree hollow surrounded by bright blue color because this was a high-level task because he wanted to restore his mana. And for this, he forgot what sleep, drinking, and water were. And for days, he concentrated on developing his ideal breathing technique to achieve his goal. So, after spending more than a week in this secluded place, probably driving everyone outside crazy with his absence, and without a single signal from himself, he achieved something. The main thing was that his senses were now maximally sharpened, allowing him to feel everything that was happening around him, and his vision had become so acute. And indeed, his vision had become so sharp that he could see dangerous Vulcan monsters approaching from several kilometers away. These ugly creatures, whose skulls were open and whose brains were unprotected by a single bone, were now gathering in flocks under the tree, and these creatures burned the World Tree. So now they couldn't just leave because a defender had appeared who would save the tree, and even in his new human body, Karzerian would be able to eliminate them quickly. It would be good for him to have a sword with him now, but it's not that important because he can go against the Vulcans with his bare hands. Even if there are many of them and they pose a direct fiery danger to the tree, they are not a direct threat to Seo Do-jun himself because his power is supreme. In general, he would now see them because even with his bare hands, he could simply tear them to pieces, just as a dog in the game tears a rag. After So Do-jun was able to pump up his body in 10 days, pure mana now flows through his veins, and this is the highest achievement right now. Thanks to his enormous reserves of mana, the battle with the creatures that once destroyed the World Tree no longer seems like something beyond the realm of fantasy. Now that the devilish cleansing machine named Karzarian has been launched at full power with mana, the Vulcans have begun to fly like empty buckets during a thunderstorm. Now there is definitely no turning back for me, except for my daughter, who dared to challenge the very defender of the World Tree at the border between worlds. No matter how fast these creatures were, no matter how agile their bodies were, only the most agonizing death they could imagine awaited them now. They would certainly have a hard time now, because if before Karzarian could not protect the World Tree from the fire-breathing creatures, now he could do anything. Thanks to the young man advancing his powers even in his weak body, So Do-jun could pour out his accumulated mana in the form of a chi combination for release. This naturally resulted in an explosion of considerable power, and even the mana user himself admitted that he had not exercised his body with mana for a long time. Even if the borrowed body of the young Do-jun was too weak compared to his original body, it was now enough for the mother to clean up. But now the fun will definitely begin, because with the help of his released mana, the savior of the World Tree burns them to the ground, showing them their place in the hierarchy. This shows that even despite very long breaks in using mana, with the right level of concentration and control over the body, much can be achieved. Of course, this is not the most ideal body for So Do-jun, but even this will suffice for the realization of mana and the protection of the World Tree, and most importantly, the task has been accomplished. Now that some of the enemies have been repelled, it is necessary to make absolutely sure that the World Tree is safe, and the energy shield made of mana will help to do this. Now Do-jun is completely convinced that the World Tree is completely safe, so he can relax and have some fun and dance. Now he can officially test how good his mana is and how it can be used in real life against a large number of real enemies on the battlefield. After stretching his neck and arms a little before rushing into heavy combat, So Do-jun estimated how many magic stones he could knock out of these bastards and decided to begin. Now the Vulcans were ready to start a serious fight against the man who had come to their land, decided to challenge them, and wounded several of their kin. However, it was worth expecting that at that very moment, her jaw would be completely torn apart by the enormous mana power that was released from Do-jun's body. His potential had truly grown thanks to the fact that, having found a natural habitat for Karzarian, he decided to devote his time to true physical training. Thanks to the fact that he renounced all earthly harm and concentrated only on growth, the accumulation of mana, and the power of breath, it was now easy to attack. The explosive waves caused by mana energy were truly devastating, as he was able to wipe out a large number of enemies. Probably everyone had already assumed that So Do-jun had long since curled up and died there, but this man was truly more resilient than even the most persistent cockroach. This power would be enough to wipe out an entire region of such monsters, and their ugly charred bodies would drop high-value crystals that could then be sold. It would indeed be a rich haul, and now that the official inspection was complete, it was time to really have some fun with the rest of Vulcan who was still breathing. After all, by defeating the rest of the monsters, he would be able to obtain a relic that he could not have imagined even in his wildest dreams, and which could not be compared to ordinary crystals. After all, by destroying all the Vulcan in this location, So Do-jun will be able to obtain the so-called Eternal Sparks, which will be enough to fully upgrade his body to the maximum. After all, as Karzarian remembered her previous lives, the probability of obtaining this was incredibly high, and now, in his new body, Do-jun would once again experience pleasure. Now, the real slaughter begins. They are just a warm-up. Now he will really be able to collect as many magic stones as he can carry in his pockets. Purely hypothetically, it was interesting how many magic crystals could fall from all the destroyed hellish creatures. But in the end, they killed every single one. As they say, once the job is done, it's time to reap the harvest of crystals. And among these crystals were indeed the unique eternal sparks that Do-jun had dreamed of. Indeed, he was not deceived. There were quite a few of them, and he had to collect every single one. But it was important to remember that an overdose could mean the destruction of the body. It was nice that he was able to find what seemed to have been lost forever in the old world, but it was important to remember that everything must be treated with caution. Of course, he was able to find a huge number of these sparks, and they naturally and endlessly nourished his body with energy, but still, all living things have their limits. The body absorbed the fiery mana with astonishing appetite, and those who are now looking for Do-jun and believe that he is in danger would know what incredible artifacts he has. He really wanted to get as much as possible and make the most of what he had received, but as mentioned earlier, this body belonged to an ordinary earthly man. Naturally, it would be worth taking the chance to obtain the mana of the heavenly tree, but for the body, it would be too much energy for a normal life. Of course, It was sad that he would have to control himself, but now he could at least absorb the eternal sparks that this tree, with its unique element of fire, had given him. The time has come to absorb as much of this energy as possible and, in the end, replace the neutral mana with fire mana, which is more powerful in its elemental nature. The body, which had been longing for powerful energy, absorbed powerful mana with incredible speed and an appetite that filled every cell with the fiery chakra of the tree. The fiery deception now fills the entire body, coming out of the mouth just as it leaves the body of a fire-breathing dragon, so much so that even now it is in such concentration. It's funny that in his past life, he didn't need these sparks at all, and Karzarian simply threw them away as if they were pebbles in his shoes, but everything changes with time. Now it takes him 10 whole minutes to absorb 1 unit, but as they say, everything comes and goes, there is nothing eternal in this world of eternal motion. He collected a lot of magic crystals to sell them at a pawn shop, just like eternal particles. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't absorb them all. The only thing left to do is to do what is appropriate for the current situation. Absorb as many particles of eternal energy as possible before the body breaks apart due to an overdose. The latest news about what happened in the new rift spread like wildfire throughout the city. And the fact is that this rift disappeared at sunset today. Mr. So Do-jun had entered it almost a month ago, and there had been no news from him. Even the Association of Heroes was surprised by his disappearance and began an investigation. Meanwhile, a fire broke out for completely unknown reasons, and a landfill near the rift caught fire, and So Do-jun's disappearance is on the agenda today and will be for a long time. People gossiped that this idiot died because you can't walk near faults. So basically natural selection took place, which is not surprising. A more reasonable person said that we should still respect the deceased, but the disappearance of the fault line is complete nonsense. Otherwise Seoul would have been destroyed. But Do-jun is alive. None of them noticed that the stranger in the hoodie standing next to them was the very same Mr. So whom they had already buried, but he was upset about something else. If the rift is gone, So Do-jun will never be able to see the world tree again, which is unfortunate. But there are advantages to this because there is still something important keeping him in this world. In this world, he still has people he must protect, even though he is not their blood relative as such, but out of duty to So Do-jun and his will. Dealing with his problems, So Do-jun finally found himself where the real life of any big city takes place, in the back alleys among criminals. In a part of town where normal people with clean reputations would never go, the most unpleasant specimens of humanity have long gathered to carry out their darkest deeds. After all, now that So Do-jun is dead, there is no need to stand on ceremony with his old grandmother and younger sister. They can simply be disposed of after being stripped of everything they own. He could squeeze out of them dozens of times more than anyone could imagine, and the girl could grow up to be beautiful, and then the boss would figure out what to do with the young girl. That is, little Yoonyeon will spend the rest of her life paying off the debts that the mafia bastards came up with on the orders of one rich bitch, Hong Hee-ju. However, they did not know that the very person they had long considered dead had already come to them, and so a visit from the other world awaits their beautiful boss. He probably believed that his ideological enemy had long since died and rotted away somewhere in a crevice, and when he arrived here in his car, he expected to come out and be the boss again. Kang Chul-woo already felt how his life had changed, and singing cheerfully, got out of the car, feeling that no one would stand in his way anymore. He was happy that now that So Do-jun was dead, he could finally breathe easy and continue his life at the pace he had always had before this incident. Therefore, feeling that no one would interfere with him anymore, he asked his manager Kim about his schedule, and Kim said that he had a dinner appointment with Representative Beck. Well, he had no plans for dinner, and upon hearing that his evening was free, Kang Chul-woo ordered his manager to contact Madam Kang and tell her that he would visit her in the evening. And if there were any new girls there, they should dress up nicely because a real predator was coming. Having settled his evening plans, the manager went upstairs with his boss. However, a very unpleasant surprise awaited him there, because it seems that the one he had already buried suddenly rose from the ground, demonstrating the miracle of resurrection. He had only just managed to rejoice that a peaceful life was beginning, and that there would be no more of that freak from the slums of Mappo with those horrible amber eyes. Before his eyes, each of his employees and subordinates was once again subjected to terrible humiliation and beatings, and he would not stand aside and would get a punch in the face. Not only did that damn freak So Do-jun not die while passing through the gates, but that cursed bastard dared to come here and personally kick him in the stomach. After all, it was too early to bury someone who, at first glance, was capable of disrupting the work of an entire underground pawnshop that had been cheating heroes out of money for years. Now dark times will truly begin for Kang Chul-woo, because Do-jun So, with a demonic gaze, ordered him to kneel and crawl towards him. Let him fall to his knees and crawl like a dog, because that is the role now reserved for the damn bastard who dared to touch the most sacred thing to Do-jun's family. Now the new leader, the one who throws around his team and employees like shit with a shovel, is Do-jun, and Kang Chul-woo himself can learn his place in the hierarchy. He miscalculated because he was so brilliantly executing the whole plan. Everything was going as it should, and it seemed that this damn bastard from the slums was dead once and for all. But no, he came back even after the rift disappeared, and now he humiliates him, one of the most influential and difficult people, forcing him to crawl like a dog. Kang Chul-woo probably couldn't understand how such a soft-hearted idiot, who could be twisted and squeezed like a floor cloth, became such a bold psychopath. The So Do-jun they knew, the one they methodically wiped their feet on, was dead, and now he was making the head of the criminal world bark like a dog, because he was worse than an animal. To be honest, a dog is too smart and noble an animal to be compared to this scum, but he continued to bark like a dog because he had no other choice. He had to obey, because the one who now held all the power was the one who gave the orders, and barking was the highest humiliation he could receive in his life. His employees were just as humiliated and beaten, sitting with their faces to the wall, knowing that if they moved, they would not leave the torture chamber alive and would be smeared across the floor. Even the fact that the mafia boss, Do-jun himself, was now kneeling before him was not enough for him, and he kicked the bastard to make him bark even louder and bow lower to the floor. Do-jun said that they were worse than dogs, obeying his every command as if he had taken away their kidneys and gallbladders, but at any moment they would stab him in the back like rats. His real name is Hwang Chang-seop, and this sad example of the degeneration of the human race doesn't even show how many times Do-jun has put people like him in their place before. Now, the one who wanted to get rid of Do-jun himself and mock his family begged for mercy, saying he would do whatever he was told. Like a loyal dog, he would lick his master's boots. But the brunette did not want to listen to these pathetic excuses, so he kicked the damn traitor Chang-seop right in the face. It hurt, of course, and at least a few facial bones were broken, and he rolled back in humiliation, knocked out, probably realizing that Do-jun was different. Note that manager Kim So-do-jun, who was still standing calmly there, approached him with a very important task as the new head of the company with racketeering rights. So Do-jun clearly and unequivocally stated that Kim was now the boss of the company and that he should not work like the lowest dog on the floor. The scary thing was that even getting rid of his superiors would not help. So now, Do-jun is giving Kim his personal permission to conduct business on behalf of the boss. Kim certainly wanted to say something, but at first he was afraid, and his facial expressions reflected that he understood that this could have dire consequences for him and others. The boss really has a lot of connections throughout Seoul, so if Kim suddenly becomes the head of the company, everyone will consider it a strange coincidence, which is logical. Therefore, even now, intimidated and cornered, Kim sincerely asked So Do-jun to spare his master one last time, but this mysterious gentleman was stubborn. The brown-eyed man asked why Kim was resisting, since he is an expert at drowning people in the sea or throwing them into a household waste shredder, which is indeed the case. If none of their gang wanted to accept anything, their beloved boss would simply be thrown into the gate to be eaten by monsters, just as Do-jun himself wanted to do. The leader understood perfectly well what awaited him, because just one mention of the gate made his ass clench, like a rabbit's nose trembles before the face of a wolf. And now he crawled even more pitifully at So Do-jun's feet, begging him to spare him and ready to work for him for the rest of his life like a dog on a chain just to survive. It seemed that this beautiful young man with amber eyes was deaf to all pleas. No matter who asked, he had serious moral principles in his heart and mind. However, deep down, even Do-jun understood perfectly well that he now needed to get rid of Han Chang-soo to avoid future problems. But there was still one problem, the theatrical sign that he had become too merciful for this cruel world. So Do-jun decided that it would be better to take a different path and let the degenerate play. After all, if he wanted to be his dog so badly, who was he to prevent a person from being a dog if he really wanted to serve him? Let him serve. Han Chang-seop looked up for a second, as if he saw the face of God before him, expecting to be forgiven and to live again as before, but a little differently. But no. Even when he reached out his hands to Do-jun, intending to take his strong hands in his trembling, sweaty palms and beg him to spare him after all. At that very moment, his gaze fell on something that, in principle, no one in this world could have expected. My God, an amber flame was burning, but there was no source of ignition here. At that very moment, his hand was engulfed in flames, a magical fire that burned everything in its path, leaving not even a smoldering ember behind. This was a story about how, because of his greed, avarice, impure thoughts, and simply rotten soul, a man lost his hand and swore allegiance to the one he had previously humiliated. But, ironically, this man turned out to be much more powerful than him because he could have killed him on the spot like a dog, but spared his hand, giving him one last chance to redeem himself. After all, losing a hand is not the same as being executed by the guillotine, so life goes on, but now under slightly different banners. And they are not the colors of the mafia. And now, the one who rules the rules of this world is So Do-jun, who will now decide who will live, But for now, Han Cho-seop has been given his last chance. However, it is worth remembering that if even a scratch appears on his relatives, So Do-jun will turn their lives into a living hell. So losing an arm will seem like a blessing from above. So Do-jun, who was officially considered to be in the rift, has made it so that now the mafia protects his family instead of harming them, and he has reshaped the world. He is still being sought by the Association of Heroes, who have no idea that the dead man is alive and walking among them, living a full life with his family. The government and the rest of the media have long since declared him missing, but with a lack of information, they have officially declared him dead. Do-jun has long been treated as a dead man, and a mourning procession was launched online in memory of the young man who risked his life for his sister. Of course, Do-jun survived, but if he came to the surface and told everyone that he was alive, it would only cause problems for him and his entire family. So he remained silent. During another anonymous trip to the supermarket food court with his sister, Do-jun told his younger sister that they would soon find a new home and move, and the girl began to eat with even greater appetite upon hearing that their wandering and the atmosphere of unrest would soon end, because a new home is always a good thing. Yoon-young really liked the fact that they were moving, because then they would finally be able to be rich, or at least appear to be rich, as they had wanted from the very beginning. So Do-jun thought that the news that his sister would be going to the same kindergarten as other children and then to school the following year would make her happy. But perhaps that wasn't quite the case. Instead of cheering up because she would finally be in the company of other people, the girl became very depressed, as if it brought back painful memories. As her older brother, I immediately became alarmed and asked what had happened and whether something had happened at kindergarten that she didn't like, since she was sad. Yoon-yeon did not hesitate to tell her brother that the children were teasing her because she had neither a mother nor a father, and when this confession reached his ears, the brunette was stunned. Of course, it was very painful to hear that your loved one was being bullied because he was an orphan, but So Do-jun himself knew how painful it was to carry the burden of being an orphan. He also hurried to reassure his little sister that she didn't have to go to kindergarten and didn't need to worry about having to see the faces of monsters. So if she wanted to, her brother could send her to school next year. And upon hearing this, Yoon-young perked up because she wouldn't have to go to kindergarten. Now the girl was really happy, and So Do-jun was thinking about sending his sister to a prestigious private school so that no one would look at her. So Do-jun scolded Kim's managers for bringing his grandmother and younger sister to a model's place, where all kinds of night butterflies and gangsters usually stay. Kim hastened to convince So Do-jun that it was his company's hotel, so there would be no security issues and there was absolutely nothing to worry about. For his grandmother and Yoon-yeon, it didn't matter that he wasn't there now. The main thing was that their brother and grandchildren, and accordingly their grandson, had returned to his wife after everyone had buried him long ago. Grandmother and sister immediately rushed to him, hugging him and rejoicing that he had returned alive and unharmed after such hell on earth in the middle of the gate. No one could have imagined, especially Grandma, that the grandson she had only recently found would come home alive after the rift closed and everyone gave up. Yoon-yeon cried loudly because she remembered how her brother had rushed forward to save her from the rift, and now, she threw herself into his arms in a state of hysterics. So Do-jun was shocked by this reaction, or rather, Karzarian, whose consciousness now lived in So Do-jun's body, was shocked. But even the god of the sword himself could not be called a stone. But a smile crossed his pale face, indicating that he was happy, and he said that yes, it was true, he had survived, so let none of them cry or grieve anymore. During a trip to a restaurant, Yoon-yeon asked if it was really true that So Do-jun had now become a hero, and this question knocked the wind out of Do-jun's sails a little. He didn't know how to respond, so he asked his younger sister if she wanted him to become a hero, but Yoon-young replied sharply and coldly that she didn't want that. With rare honesty and grim coldness, the girl said that heroes are always fighting monsters and dying all the time, and she didn't want her brother to die like that. Let him be a simple man without any abilities, but he would be alive and always close to her and her grandmother. When So Do-jun heard this confession, he was speechless. He was pleased to hear this, but at the same time, he was hurt by the memories of what had happened in his past life when he was the god of the sword, Karzarian, and what loneliness was. The family wants him to always be with them, remembering that he was the only one who survived in the past world and reached the end, experiencing complete loneliness and pain. He was the only one who went to the very end and sacrificed his life, so he lost a lot during the endless struggle with monsters and decided not to get attached anymore. But now, miraculously, something he had long forgotten and felt no warmth for, because cruel life had taught him not to get attached, is back with him. In this new world, even if it is in So Do-jun's body, he has a little happiness that he is ready to defend with all his strength and was sure that he could take care of. In Seoul, as in all of Korea, Real panic is setting in because the man has not come forward to refute his death and reassure everyone. The Heroes Association has long been in complete chaos and tension because none of them can even find a trace of So Do-jun, as if he had vanished into thin air. Even Na Tai-hwan, founder of the South Korean Heroes Association and director of the World Heroes Federation, has no idea if they will ever be able to find out anything. His assistant hastened to confirm his worst fears, saying that at the moment they really had no information, and she was very sorry to have to tell him that. The founder acknowledged that this was indeed unfortunate news because the rift that had disappeared on its own could reappear at any moment with intensity and force. The assistant agreed that the variables were dangerous, and that it would be much better if the monster wave did crash down, as then things would be stable, but she was told to keep her mouth shut. Because at this rate, they are putting the unarmed civilians in incredible danger, and as the founder of the company, he cannot take that risk. The fact is that Na Tai-hwan is one of the 100 most respected heroes on the planet, because he decided to become president and was chosen to protect the votes in human history. He will certainly dismantle domestic conglomerates, but he is not primarily interested in the presidency or even conglomerates, but only in the safety of the people. And he will lay his head on the chopping block just so that the heroes fulfill their true purpose in life and protect all people from rifts and monsters. Let the assistant continue to search. The fact is that the owner of the house in Mapo wants to sell it, and they were offered compensation above market price so as not to rob those who had already lost a loved one. However, at that very moment, something happened that attracted even more attention because the news that followed was so shocking that it knocked everyone off their feet. Damn it. What kind of madness is going on in the world right now? And how quickly are the rifts in the core of the planet and the fabric of space growing, already far beyond the borders of Korea? The situation is truly dire because many countries are recording rifts and anomalies, and the US and China are already in the control phase, but the whole problem is now in England. Of course, the most reliable heroes were sent to the new rifts, but what happened next could not fit into anyone's head because a catastrophe began. The new alert signal in the menu did not bode well because, in the current situation, alerts usually only brought problems to the whole world. So now, to the great horror of the director and founder of the company, the anomalies had spread beyond the Asian continent and reached Europe in a very short time. And indeed, another wave of real horror was beginning, because the rift had been discovered in England, which is very far from here, and action had to be taken. Meanwhile, life in the Korean capital seems to be continuing at its usual calm pace, because the rift has disappeared, so it is possible to live peacefully for a while. Recognizing his death and retreating into the shadows of society was a true blessing for Do-jun because it allowed him to live in safety for his family and himself. And now he is going to strike everywhere, but in a very curious place, which probably breathed a sigh of relief when it learned of his so-called death. Probably after the arrival of the one they had long considered dead, they believed in God, because a long-dead person could not just come back. The cashier immediately realized that this young man in a hoodie, judging by his menacing aura and facial expression, was the same monster who had terrorized him earlier, causing him trauma. It turned out that he was not alone and had brought with him a leader disguised as an ordinary citizen who was waiting for the legendary terrorist to appear. As they say, the man expected that the one who ruined their entire business by forcing them to exchange stones without commission would come right into his hands and get what he deserved. So now he would be able to get all the moral compensation he wanted from this jerk. But it seemed that Do-jun wasn't even looking at him and continued to stick to his guns. The arrogant brunette in the hoodie said that it was good that someone from the top was here now, because he had brought so much material for the deal that the boss would need. Do-jun quickly took the heavy backpack off his shoulders and threw it at the chief manager's feet, saying, "Take it and sort it out, it's your job because evaluating stones is difficult." The manager thought that there was probably a whole bunch of low-grade stones that hadn't been processed, like last time, so they refused to do business with the visitor and told him to leave. Do-jun calmly asked why they weren't going to do business with him, not understanding why they were arguing, since he could make them a lot of money. However, the head of this shady office replied that doing business with a commission would result in nightly losses, so they would no longer work with him and told him to leave. Jun simply laughed at this response and said that they would regret their decision because they mainly brought in small junk here, but he had relics and other valuable items. The head of this shady operation didn't understand why this idiot wouldn't come to his senses, because there was a reason why even the gate center took a 5% commission. And in general, there is such a thing as the distribution structure of magic stones. But why explain anything to this moron? He just takes his cobblestones and leaves. As they say, if you don't want to do business with a normal person who brings truly valuable relics, then he will go and make a profit elsewhere. They didn't yet know what treasure they would lose until the backpack, which couldn't withstand the pressure, burst open and bright red stones, among which were some special ones, spilled out. But when the cashier, who was used to all kinds of wonders, saw this, His jaw dropped to his chest because the stones were simply magical. What's more, among them was the legendary crystal that many were hunting for, so now they had to think about what to do with such a customer. Among the very high-level crystals, which are extremely rare, there was a legendary hero's crystal with a diamond star in the center. So Dojun, as if manipulating their greed and desire to get the legends, said that since this genius did not need such valuable relics, they should forget about them. The hero's stone is not just some magical hero's stone that can be found by simply chopping up a mutated chicken with horns. It is a whole legend of this world. It was born in the depths of an underground laboratory in Mexico, where Kurzaman, the king of the drug cartel, used magic stones in his experiments. Buying up magic stones to use in the creation of new drugs, the drug lord ultimately came to one great conclusion, albeit accidental in nature. This is how he awakened the power of the magic stone, and the former king of the Mexican drug cartel was able to awaken as a new hero and make his creation a legend. And from that day on, this stone, called the hero's magic crystal, has been the most powerful source of energy, but it is expensive due to the difficulties of extraction, even for experienced heroes. Well, if these clowns of oblivion don't need stones, then let them collect everything that fell because of their fault and let Dojun go in peace to find another exchanger in Seoul. I understand that it is impossible to find another person with such valuable goods to buy, so the boss immediately tried to grovel before the visitor so that he would not leave. It's funny how they immediately agreed to practically no commission just to get at least 1% from the sale of such a valuable stone. They probably even treated him to free drinks just so that Dojun's money bag wouldn't leave. But there was still one complaint that essentially gave the boss no peace. The problem was that this strange, gloomy half% commission was completely unreasonable and, to be honest, really unnecessary. Dojun understood perfectly well how much power he had in his hands and said that if they didn't like something, he would immediately take his stones and go to another shop. The head said that it wasn't that he was unhappy with such a low commission, but he was simply curious as to why it had been sharply reduced to 0.5%, and he received the answer that Dojun was very angry. A 0.5% commission meant a complete lack of profit for them, so they immediately fell at the visitor's feet, begging him to forgive them. Dojun said that they should stop groveling at his feet and apologizing endlessly like a mangy dog, and that they should just tell him clearly whether they were going to lower the commission or not. The cashier who watched all this admitted that their visitor was indeed the most uncouth, rude, and despicable person you could find. Still, the manager was tired of all this pressure and said that he would lower the commission, but at what cost? And he understood that the losses they would suffer would be simply enormous. No matter how hard he tried to argue, he understood that this damn insolent man would not listen to him and would manipulate the situation so that he would simply take his stones away. The head could also be understood because, in any case, he would not keep his head on his shoulders if there were even more losses, so he asked for at least 9%. It seems that the visitor is completely deaf to the idea of compromise, and even if the employee asked for a small percentage, he wouldn't care. Apparently, this bastard has no compassion or understanding that he is not the only one in this world who wants something, and the poor cashier is already tired. In general, it is beneath human dignity to beg a customer on your knees to allow you to take a percentage. But with this bastard, there is no other way. He insisted that he only needed 1% and stuck to his guns as if that were the only way, demanding that the commission be set exactly as he said. She wanted to yell at him, calling him a damn robber, but she understood that there was no other way to deal with customers, and that she had to be patient. His hands were already shaking from how hopeless the situation was, and it seemed that things couldn't get any worse and that there would be no change in this sad situation. It seemed that everything was over and they were left without money. But then this damn bastard said that he had at least 7 more bags just like this one. Of course, this was also a kind of robbery, but if he took a percentage from each bag, it would be the same 7% profit. So let him bring them here. If the head of the financial department was probably happy, only Sir probably already felt that his hands would get tired of polishing all these stones. It was decided that a huge contract would now be signed with the man who brought such mountains of crystals, and so the contract was signed without any problems. This time, the contract for the purchase of stones was indeed huge, and thanks to the fact that many stones were brought in, the hero managed to knock out a whopping amount. For today's deal, he received 67 billion won, so now buying a house for 110 billion doesn't seem like a fantasy to him anymore. However, there is one problem that turns all this into a damn lie. There are not enough physical incarnations to collect high-level stones. The trouble is that, as a human, he cannot calmly pass through the rifts, and probably, in his delight at the money in his account, Dojun did not feel the shockwave. He probably didn't even notice that the head of the finance department felt the shockwave that passed through the earth, even though she was far beyond Korea. But the wave reached Korea, even though it was in one of the southern regions of England, so let everyone who had any plans in this country adjust them, because they need to be scrapped as soon as possible. Only Dojun probably felt some kind of pleasant situation in his favor, as another damn rift happened here, damn it. Even 300 miles away from here. Of course, it's bad that another rift has occurred, but it's far away, so he can relax and spend time with his sister and grandmother for once in a long time. So Dojun said that it would be bad for people without abilities, and went to the exit of the shop, took his payment, and headed to his family for the first time in a long time. Previously, no matter what country Karzarian was in before merging with So Dojun, no matter what associations you had with them, he would have gone to stop the rupture zone, but he no longer lives by these principles because he has people who need him and with whom it would be worth spending time together with his family at last and in a meaningful way. Since he had such a big haul of money today, it would be better to take his family to a restaurant and finally treat them to a delicious meal of premium roast beef. Both his grandmother and younger sister were happy to finally try such a unique dish, but the old woman was still worried about the price of their dinner and appetizers. The evening promised to be pleasant because even if it was the cheapest meal, spending the evening with the family over a pleasant dinner was a treat that was extremely rare for some. She still thought that 250,000 won for a small portion of meat was too expensive, and that it would be better to choose something cheaper from the menu they were given. So Dojun replied that he had earned a lot of money this time, so the family didn't need to worry and could eat as much as they wanted because they had enough money for everything delicious. Yoon Yeon picked up her chopsticks and a small piece of grilled beef that smelled so good it made her mouth water, and blew on the very hot piece. The next second, after tasting the meat, she broke into a smile, feeling the pleasure of how delicious the dish she was now tasting was after long days of poverty. The grandmother of these two watched her grandchildren eat, still worried that this food was too expensive to simply enjoy right now. Do-jun was basically unhappy that the old woman was embarrassed to take the food, so he decided to order another serving of ribs and premium beef and the most delicious dishes. She took the order and promised that all the dishes would be on the table soon, leaving the family of such a generous visitor in shock at the amount of food. The young man ordered 4 servings for each member of the family, but the grandmother was shocked that he had ordered so much and did not know how they would eat it all. The brunette asked his grandmother to calm down and said that today, they should eat their fill, so let grandmother also eat as much delicious food as she can. The old woman resisted for a while, but when her granddaughter and older grandson began to feed her from both sides, she finally gave in to the children's insistence. Yoon Yeon fed her grandmother with a fork, offering her a piece of meat and telling her to be sure to eat it because the meat was very tasty, and the old woman realized that her granddaughter was kind. Deciding that it wasn't every day that she had the chance to try such expensive and delicious dishes, she decided that since it was expensive, she might as well treat herself to a feast and relax. The old woman was truly delighted with the taste of the beef, realizing that her grandchildren and younger granddaughter had not taken advantage of the unrealistically delicious beef, even though she was eating it right now. And now, sitting at the table, they could finally spend time together like any family, enjoying a delicious meal and engaging in warm, friendly conversation over dinner. However, this evening was also destined to be interrupted because a star came here and decided that since she was so famous, she could interfere with people being with their families. The appearance of a girl who, instead of perfume, used a liquid concentrate of coolness and attractiveness caused a real stir. She came for the same So Do-jun, who, it turns out, is not alone, having already left her uncle behind, and now she is looking for him. So the legendary heroine of Korea, the best of the best, asked if she could talk to this young man, but she received the cruelest answer of her life. As soon as the lady with a goddess complex continued her question, asking if he was a hero, he replied, asking if she couldn't see that he was trying to spend time with his family. So let her wait until he finishes dinner, and then they can talk, and let her come over when they finish their dinner. And this goddess was brushed off. Just think, some kid from the neighborhood had just asked her to wait until he finished eating, without even looking at the fact that she was, by the way, a legendary heroine. Hyunju-yeon was used to everyone bowing down to her wherever she appeared, but now some kid dared to brush her off and told her to just wait for him. Sure enough, Seoul's #1 heroine went to the waiting area with her head down, wondering what kind of person he was, since he had no respect for her. Of course, she didn't like that some kid was making the heroine wait, but since she wanted to talk about what happened between him and her uncle, it was worth the wait. So she peeked at the crowd that was staring at her, whispering about what kind of arrogant jerk he must be to make Hyunju-young herself bare her teeth. The whole crowd looked at her as if she were a goddess who had descended from heaven, not understanding what such a strong personality was doing among mere mortals in the corner of a diner. Of course, everyone had heard how some uncouth kid with shaggy black hair had been rude to the heroine, and it had become the subject of gossip that evening. The crowd had no intention of leaving her alone. To be honest, the buzzing of flies was getting on everyone's nerves. They were all wondering what kind of high-ranking world star she was, especially since she was so beautiful. She was also one of the 10 most beautiful heroes in the world, and she was waiting here for some strange guy, leaving everyone to wonder who could make such a girl wait. She was already starting to get angry because some idiot who had entered the gate just 2 months ago had managed to survive, and so Dojun was interested in her. Most likely, I woke up in those gates, and after I left, I became the prime suspect in everything, and then I was declared dead in a new fault in the Mapo area. All of this was, of course, surreal, that this man could have died, because So Dojun is definitely more alive than anyone else, and is now sitting and eating with his family. My god, what kind of person is this insolent kid with cold amber eyes that made me tense up with just one glance and a word that slipped from the handsome man's lips? However, something doesn't add up about a man who, just 2 months ago, went through the gate and awakened to become a hero of the highest rank, something that takes many years for most people. This young man awakened so quickly that it raises a lot of questions and suspicions about his hidden superpowers, previously unknown to anyone, and she will find out. Nevertheless, dinner came to an end, and since the brunette had spent time with his family, he could, in principle, answer her questions, as Ju Yong had hoped, but someone rude beat her to it. The sound of rough shuffling on the parquet floor, made by someone's worn-out old leather shoes, hinted that the owner would definitely be an unpleasant person. No matter how much he wanted to hide all his problems from his family, they always found him first, and So Dojun knew that nasty, squeaky voice he heard very well. It was spoken by a very unpleasant-looking marginal person with dyed hair, who asked if he had seen So Dojun standing in front of him, and how did this damn cockroach manage to get out of his brother's clutches? In principle, the true Kang Chul-woo knew that Dojun was a nimble insect, but now he was convinced. Poor Hyun Ju-yeon was hoping to talk to the hero now, but as always, they threw a wrench in the works because Kang Chul-woo came out like a rainworm after a downpour. And now this bastard would threaten So Dojun right in front of his family at the restaurant where they had decided to spend the evening. That couldn't be allowed to happen. Ju Young understood perfectly well that the two of them would be cramped in this small restaurant, so she tried not to move and hide herself from the gaze of the uncouth blonde. At the same time, when she was trying to come up with a plan on where to go, So Do-jin called her with a very important request to protect his family, because he was in charge. He promised to listen to the girl, but she had to do what he asked, take care of his relatives, but she didn't understand the question. She was still being given orders, but the brunette was adamant, firmly stating that the girl had to send his relatives home in a taxi. Of course, it was a shock, but what could she do? This damn freak, who not only survived in the rift where people don't come back alive, but also dares to manipulate her interest in his abilities. Well, that was really clever. So he explained to his relatives that they would have to stay with him because he had to repay a debt to someone. But cockroaches need to be squashed so that impressionable children, let alone elderly people with already frail nerves and hearts, don't see blood and guts. Finally, the taxi pulled up to the restaurant, and everyone could relax because the old woman and the child, who was too young to see such things, were finally leaving. Ju-yeon, as requested, made sure that the hero's little sister and grandmother went home safely, chatting amiably with the child to reassure her. After all, the child and grandmother of So Do-jun needed to know about the scale of the horror that now awaited their relative, and she kept a calm facade. Although I myself understood that there would be a real massacre in the building now, if the highest-ranking hero was there was no hope for a simple resolution of the conflict. Watching the taxi speed away into the distance, Korea's first heroine felt that she had probably been demoted to the position of personal assistant. Of course, poor thing, she thought that real madness was about to begin in the building because leaving those two in the same room was really very dangerous. If So Do-jun knew even the slightest rules of decency and cared about the people around him, then the man who was his opponent was a complete moral freak. A simple, well-deserved slap drove him into such a rage that he was ready to tear anyone to pieces, regardless of their gender or age. Now he is definitely torn apart by anger, because the slap was like seeing a red rag in front of him, so now anyone can get hit. And the moment the waitress, whose professional duty it was to warn that fighting was prohibited here, he simply hit her with all his might. The woman fell from the blow, alarming all the patrons, and even manager Kim rushed over to help her, because it's wrong to treat people that way. So Do-jun immediately ordered all the patrons to go outside and take out absolutely everyone who could be hurt in the fight, so that there would be no casualties. Kang Chul-woo went berserk and shouted that this damn black-haired bastard would definitely die, because he deserved no other outcome, but we'll see who wins. So Do-jun slipped under the freak's feet, even when he was about to raise his hand to strike him, and he probably knocked out half of his face or his eye. This disgraceful wolf with bleached white teeth now sat and wiped his snot on his fist after receiving a free rhinoplasty on the spot with one blow. Now they would definitely rip out his Adam's apple because the one he threw at the gate was standing in front of him, and that meant the price would be life for life, if not worse. However, who was the pitiful one, the one who survived the gates and passed through them? emerging as a reborn hero, or the creature that was bleeding under his feet and gasping for breath? So Dojun asked, as if he didn't know the answer himself. Did he really bring him to the gate and lock him there, condemning him to a cruel death? And there was a lot to talk about. Even knowing that he was on the verge of death, the blonde rat dared to say that he had nothing to talk about with someone whose own father had abandoned him and whose stepmother had ordered his elimination. Hearing what he wanted, Dojun took his phone out of his pocket to turn on the voice recorder and record what he now needed for our case. After activating the recorder button, he ordered the worker to repeat what he had said earlier, but he decided to play the bulletproof soldier. But nothing came of it. Now that he had the recording device in his hands, the brunette coldly told the blonde-haired man to repeat everything he had just said, only louder and without grunting. But the crazed freak simply said that Dojun was talking complete nonsense, not even knowing who he was messing with his rotten talk, because he knew his place. After all, his mother, according to the one who ordered Dojun's elimination, was a corrupt woman, and he, like the water in her womb, should die here and now, and then his family would be dealt with. It turns out that Dojun was getting in the way of everyone's life simply because he was born into the wrong family, at the wrong time, and was not the person who was abandoned and unlucky. No one knew that such a bastard from the back alleys would possess fiery mana, but he was unlucky because the man he raised his hand against was no ordinary person either. Even though he was strong enough to use fire mana in his fist, Chul Wu was still inferior in strength to someone who had undergone the training of the World Tree. He was shocked that the fist that was aimed directly at the target and reinforced with mana suddenly bounced off, resulting in a draw because the forces were opposite but equal. So the rumors that So Dojun had returned from the gate, a completely different person, reborn in the gate, and that this damned freak also had extraordinary strength were true. The fact that the one he considered to be just a cockroach who would survive in any conditions was now ready to rip out his Adam's apple to his heart with one soft touch of his hand on his body. And in principle, it's good that at the very beginning it was decided to get everyone out of here. Otherwise, such a destructive wave would have definitely burst their eardrums. Well, or there would definitely have been accidental casualties, knowing how crazy Kang Chul-woo was, because the person who attacked first and struck would pay for the damage to property. Humanly speaking, I felt sorry for the waitress and all the staff, who had called the police countless times, but no one answered the phone, which is understandable. At the very moment when the girl was already having a hysterical fit because of what had happened, help came from where it was least expected, and the goddess descended from heaven. Hyunju Young offered her help, asking the waitress who had suffered so much not to worry because she would take care of everything herself, so let her breathe slowly. The unfortunate food service worker did not know how to thank the world-famous star for her help, because everything could have ended even more tragically than the destruction. So Dojun delivered a series of brilliant, precise blows to Kang Chul-woo's face, who probably couldn't even raise his hand in response, so strong and fast were the blows. Hyunju Yeon learned that Kang Chul-woo was also an incredibly strong B-rank hero, but the fact that he was being beaten and couldn't strike back was beyond belief. She couldn't understand what rank So Dojun was, because even an A rank couldn't give him such a free opportunity to deal with a B rank so quickly and easily. However, So Dojun had to be stopped because if he continued like this, he would definitely be reported to the police for using his power so recklessly. Hyunju Yeon politely reminded him that if he continued to beat his opponent with such malice and fury, he would definitely die, so he should stop to avoid going to prison. Realizing that he had gotten too carried away by his emotions, So Dojun threw the unconscious blonde's body aside as if it were a piece of trash and walked away, shaking his hands. Hyunju asked what the new hero knew about Kang Cheol-woo and how much So Dojun himself knew, as it was important for understanding the whole case. So Dojun replied in a calm, even tone, as if he hadn't beaten anyone up a second ago, that he already knew almost everything there was to know and asked if there was anything important he had missed. The girl replied that Kang Chul-woo was closely related to a former hero named Kang Yoon-pyo, which could potentially affect Dojun's entire future life. And this insignificant rat with ugly bleached hair was using the power of his cousin, a high-ranking hero, to do all kinds of shit while staying dry. However, the brunette knew this, so he was not surprised. He only asked if it was really a big problem that he had to react to immediately. It turns out that Dojun knew everything all along, which even the most brilliant heroine in the village couldn't guess, how knowledgeable but reckless he was. Of course, his opponent was a truly reckless, unprincipled jerk who did whatever he wanted thanks to his cousin's protection, and there would be problems. The girl knew nothing about the enmity between these two, but she didn't think that her cousin would interfere in such trifles, which made the brunette smile suspiciously. Ju Yeon didn't understand how he could smile and feel calm and not be afraid of such a serious enemy as Kang Yoon-pyo, who could easily break his neck. However, he was concerned about something completely different, namely that Ju Yeon knew too much about him, which was very stressful. So now there would be a serious conversation. He was not at all happy that some girl, even if she was a heroine, knew more about him than he himself could know. So now she would be subjected to a biased interrogation. And he would make this haughty heroine tremble before him, as if she were a little girl. In principle, he didn't need to, because she was already trembling like a schoolgirl in class. However, she seems to have failed to fulfill part of her duty because she promised to take care of everything that happens, but she still did something wrong and will be reprimanded. Deciding that she can no longer endure such eye contact with the terrifying So Do-jun, she says that it's nothing, just that her uncle asked her for one thing. The thing is, he used to come to his uncle's store in Gasan and sell magic stones there, so she suggested that he sell them to her now, right here and right away, in large quantities. He resisted for a long time and she only asked briefly how many stones Ju-yun wanted him to sell her, not expecting her to agree to anything big. However, the girl decided to play big and said she would buy everything, so Do-jun had on hand, expecting that he would have a lot of stones. So Do-jun knew that he had stones that she could not even imagine, and said that the number of artifacts he had was unreal. But the beauty replied that he couldn't even imagine how much money the highest-ranking heroes had, and that the amount would far exceed his expectations. Do-jun was not going to sell them, but he had several conditions, and once he dictated them, the girl wanted to know what exactly he was going to sing now. The brunette only said that there would be nothing extraordinary in these requests, and that someone like her would find it very easy to do what he was asking of her now. Hong Hee-ju, feeling that her plans and dreams had been shattered by the walls of the real world, drowned her grief in alcohol and, in a fit of rage, threw a glass against the wall of her office. Perhaps this blonde, who was drowning in luxury and endless self-love, had no idea how destructive alcohol was to the female beauty she was so proud of. It was very sad for her assistant, who managed to dodge the glass when his boss shouted that the bastard So Do-jun should have died long ago at the gates. However, now he had come out of hiding again, and the poor manager could only respond that he was sorry, even though the Association of Heroes considered him dead after his disappearance from the gate. But the bitch didn't want to hear any excuses, so she asked the manager what he was going to do with this bastard, but he said there was something he needed to report. It turns out that So Do-jun beat Kang Cho-woo very badly, and Hong Hee immediately suspected that something was really wrong, and that this freak knew something. He shouldn't know about the plans she had in her head, and that she was planning to get rid of her unwanted former stepson, and she couldn't let anything slip. She has to cover up what happened herself so that her grandfather, the head of the family, doesn't find out. So she has to figure out how to cover it up. She had to make sure that nothing came to light and interfered with the sale of the company's shares. Therefore, she had to control the media so that they didn't publish anything unnecessary and the company could survive. Next, she needs to silence the police. However, there was no need to do this because the company's managers had long since silenced the authorities and the media. Now she could breathe easy only because she had such a brilliant and effective manager. But he warned her about what was really important. Of course, silencing the police and the media is a very good move, but it is not a panacea for all problems, because there is another variable that affects the outcome of the situation. After all, it is said in secret that the cousin of the beaten Kang Chul-woo is the legendary fighter of the highest rank, Kang Yoon-pyo. So they are still playing with fire. Hong Hee-ju was shocked to hear that the brother of the man she sent to eliminate her longtime acquaintance, Kang Yoon-pyo's hated stepson, could turn out this way. Even among heroes, Kang Chul-woo has a reputation as a complete scumbag who lives off his older brother's fame and the money his family gives him, wasting his life away. And in society, everyone believes that Kang Yoon-pyo truly adores and dotes on his cousin Kang Chul-woo, but as they say, things are not what they seem at first glance. In reality, Kang Yoon-pyo is the dominant one of the two, acting as the so-called leader who keeps his crazy brother in check. He uses the crazy and unprincipled Kang Chul-woo to clear the way for him and get rid of unnecessary people, or rather, to do all the dirty work. If Kang Chul-woo falls under the pressure of police manipulation, it will also mean the beginning of problems for his cousin, and they won't be able to start acting at all. So, in Hong Hee-ju's best interests, she needs to meet with this jerk immediately, and the meeting needs to be arranged as soon as possible, which the manager immediately agreed to. And as the blonde president of HCS Capital remembered, the loyalists who had switched sides to So Do-jun, Hwang Chang-sup, was now also out of their favor and was taking care of Do-jun's family. He really threw a spanner in the works, so they would have to contact Prosecutor Park because the traitor had to pay for defecting to Do-jun's side. According to statistics, there are only 37 fault lines with abnormal energy and frequent monster appearances throughout South Korea. Among all these zones, there are 5 that are currently being turned into gateways, and only heroes associated with the association itself can hunt in the rest. And that is according to a specially compiled schedule and a golden pass. just like Hyun Hee-ju, who confirmed her identity and wished to return alive and well from the expedition. Therefore, once they were launched, it was time to enter the cave, which could hold many interesting creatures, and so Do-jun himself could definitely be there. And since there is only one entrance here, even if the heroine Hyun Ju-yeon herself came, they thoroughly checked her data and controlled the passage with particular strictness. Another member of the Heroes Association, a lower-ranked heroine but the head of one of the guilds, Jong In-ju, with a scar across her face, was surprised that Ju-yeon had led everyone here. Because this hunting ground is located directly on the fault line, Korea's first heroine replied that the rewards here are high and there is no point in wasting time on trifles. She immediately hurried to look back to see if the restless character, So Do-jun, was behind her and had not gone somewhere more dangerous without her. Luckily, this restless man was indeed standing behind her and had not taken a step away, remembering that they had made a deal that evening in the restaurant. So Do-jun promised her that if she helped him get through the rift zone, he would sell all the magic he had at market price because that's where the biggest money is always to be found. Hyun Ju-yeon, a heroine with experience, had heard and seen a lot. But for someone to rush into the rift just because they paid more money was something new to her as a person. She really understood that this man had truly lost his mind, but the heroine understood that even without her uncle's request, she still needed the hero's stones, so she didn't mind a little madness. But still, there should be at least some line between being reckless and rushing headlong into danger, and having at least some instinct for self-preservation in this world. Jong In-ju was already head over heels in love with her colleague, so I asked her who this young man with black hair was that she was staring at, but she replied that he was an acquaintance. How clingy was this ugly girl with a scar across her face who still wouldn't let up, thinking that this young man in a hoodie was a potential groom. But she was quickly reassured that they were here on a mutual assignment, as they had signed a contract, so there could be no sentimentality between the two. That wasn't their priority right now because they were right in the middle of a potential geopathogenic fault zone where absolutely anything abnormal could happen. This is probably normal for heroes, but among them, there is one who has encountered such anomalies since he was a child. So the evening ceased to be dull. They immediately took up a defensive stance, preparing to repel attacks from above, but among them was one who did not even take a step because why bother moving and wasting energy for nothing? I saw that the heroes were already standing at attention, but the one who had awakened quite recently was not even going to react in any way. So familiar was this picture to him. A huge, monstrous bird with sharp claws descended from the heavens, intending to grab anyone who entered its territory, and the heroes had to react immediately. The heroes decided to take action as soon as possible, but no one was in a hurry to step forward until they received a direct order from their leader. Experienced in such battles, Jong In-ju immediately rushed to inform everyone that this creature was called a Cocastrian, so they were definitely doomed. Hyun Ju-yeon quickly positioned everyone in the right places. Some had to defend, some had to strike at the legs, and some had to parry in the air. But, as always, they were beaten to it by the one from whom no useful action was expected. So Do-jun rushed forward like an arrow toward the bird, preparing to knock it off its feet. To be honest, everyone was speechless when they saw how fast this brunette was rushing forward toward the winged monster, but he didn't care. So Do-jun rushed forward first, striking without even waiting for orders. They probably decided to leave him behind to watch the old men fight. He thought he would get to know the situation a little and catch his breath, but as soon as he entered the gate, the battle began in earnest. So they had to regroup as quickly as possible. Waiting for orders from the expedition leader would take too long, so he decided to act first, clearing the way for the others and took off like a bird into the sky. While Hyun Ju-yeon was giving everyone instructions on the positions they should take on the battlefield, someone had already rushed ahead and overtaken them all with brilliant attacks. The young man they considered to be a serious fighter, probably because of his recent entry into the gate and rebirth as a new hero, broke through them with his sword. But it was this newcomer who now gave them such a kick in the butt, rushing forward with such enthusiasm that it would probably be enough for an entire army of larger and stronger soldiers. For the past incarnation of So Do-jun, Cocastrian was as common a sight as a pigeon pecking at bread in a garbage dump for an ordinary city dweller, so it was no big deal. She probably didn't even know that his body had enough mana to power them all, but he was ready to show them all his agility and power in action. This was already an opponent of a fairly high class, against whom either strong mana or a sufficiently powerful attribute in the form of a weapon or gloves was needed. But Do-jun didn't need that. And by the way, the magnificent young warrior could handle it without any of those things, using only his bare hands and the perfect concentration of chakra in his limbs, which had such enormous potential. One blow from him was enough to cause an incredibly strong shockwave that only high-ranking warriors are capable of, but definitely not beginners. Hyun Ju-yeon silently watched as, before her very eyes, a boy who had just begun his journey as a hero knocked down and destroyed a powerful enemy with a single blow. The Cocastrian was a large and powerful bird-like monster, and it would have taken a whole group of high-ranking heroes to destroy it. But here the boy had done it alone. Only a group of well-coordinated warriors could have destroyed such an enemy. But as So Do-jun said, he was not done finishing off this hellish monster, because this creature still has the strength to tremble, which means it is alive, and now he strikes it with one blow of his foot, sending it to the other world, or more precisely, back to the wormhole. With one foot, without even using any mana boosters or physical enhancements, Do-jun easily finished off this malicious bird, leaving everyone with a silent question. Now, all the heroes are truly in shock. Before their very eyes, the monster they were going to defeat as a group was finished off, and love would feel like a nobody. Jong In-ju was the first to ask her colleague, "Are we really looking at a normal person? Or is this also an anthropomorphic monster in front of us?" Hyunju Yeon herself could not answer what kind of person this newcomer was, and said that he was probably just strong, because she herself did not know the logical answer to this. The clingy Jong In-ju was not going to let go of Ju-yeon, saying that it was not an answer to say that he was just strong, and that not every hero could defeat such an opponent with one blow. Tired of such pressure and persistence, Ju-yeon simply said that if it was a simple elimination, then her colleague was also capable of it, so it was nothing surprising. This ugly dwarf got so carried away that she said that eliminating such an enemy right in the air is really not an easy thing, and the bird itself crashed. Cocastrian is not a simple bird, so now, looking at Do-jun, even Ju-yeon herself wants to understand what is wrong with him, or what is so strange about his abilities. Even she has begun to doubt that the person with whom she made a deal is human. And even if he is human, what kind of damn hybrid is he? Realizing that they had been humiliated like little children, the leader of the whole group decided that they needed to urgently change their plan of action for the sake of further progress on their journey. Now she would go alone to the central area of the rift, but her order was interrupted by Do-jun, who said that he would not share his progress with freeloaders. They had made no contribution to the victory over the monster, so they did not deserve the crystal. But it seemed that the commander was now interested in a completely different phenomenon. So Do-jun hastily hid the crystal in the inner compartment of his backpack, so that it would not be lost when he heard the question about his level of skill with the sword. Junyoung asked if it was true that this place did not match his skill level, so that she could immediately transfer him to a more difficult place on the rift map, without thinking twice. So Do-jun agreed because in these lands, poor and strong creatures, you can't really get your hands on magical artifacts, so the new location was just right. Hearing his agreement, Ju-yeon asked So Do-jun to follow her because she knew the geography of the area, so anyone who wanted to could come along and keep up, but they wouldn't find it. For So Do-jun, the promise of a new location was like manna from heaven, so he followed where they led him, realizing that he was now the focus of everyone else's attention. Ju! Yeon rushed ahead, thinking how they could have overlooked such a strong man, even though at first glance he seemed like a complete idiot and a weakling, but he was above them. Moreover, the one they considered a complete failure turned out to be so strong that he knocked the huge Cocastrian to the ground, leaving the others to eat dust. Without thinking twice and maintaining a fighting stance, So Do-jun immediately rushed after the captain, leaving behind those whom Sam called freeloaders, and he was right in a way. All those who were unlucky enough not to be chosen by the captain to go on the long raid watched as a new legend, one they didn't even know about, took off. And if their dear Hyunju Yeon was a bullet, then this young man was a swift ray of light, because the speed of light is much higher than any speed in the world, and they were lagging behind. One of Jong In-ju's protégés asked the guildmaster if they were going to follow them, but the answer was obvious. And now they couldn't catch up anywhere or in any way. They understood perfectly well that today they would not see luck as their own ears, because thanks to one interesting newcomer, the heroes had become secondary characters. Before that, they were praised as heroes of the highest rank, but now they were overshadowed by a little boy who had just entered the gates and been reborn. The very realization that there were people compared to whom even their rather high rank was child's play was frightening. But even more frightening was this incomprehensible person. His abilities could not be comprehended by any reasonable mind, because in order to defeat such a huge monstrous enemy, one would need to be godlike. Ju Yeon struggled through the forest at tremendous speed, constantly looking back so as not to lose the man who alone could overturn their entire expedition. The haughty lady thought that perhaps she had gone too fast and needed to slow down a little, and looking back, she thought she had gone too fast. Because even though he was strong, his speed might be significantly lower than hers, so she needed to make concessions and understand. The attack continued when the man asked a question that probably knocked the ground out from under her feet, saying that she should run faster because she was lagging behind. A powerful statement about the fact that she was running too slowly. In principle, she could have endured anything, but the fact that she would be reproached for her slow pace. She's a heroine, for crying out loud, but now she's gasping for breath as if she's never gone further than the store for drinks in her life. This weirdo who just walked through the gate declares that she is too slow and stands behind her because he allows himself to easily overtake her. So now she is standing behind him, sweating like a pig, unable to believe that this could have happened and that she was overtaken by the second fastest person in Korea. However, there is always someone faster than you, and you shouldn't forget that competition is a natural part of life in this world, and she is slower than Dojun thought. He reminded her that she was much slower than he thought, and behaved as if she didn't want to be overtaken, which put her in her place. Basically, he didn't care about her because the most important thing he was interested in was obtaining resources. So he began to peer into the rocky mountains that lay ahead. He realized that the only use for this lady was probably her knowledge of the area, so he asked her what was there without even letting her catch her breath after the long run. Of course, Ju Yong knew everything perfectly well and replied that the boss of the fault zone lived in this mountain in the gorge, and of course, such information would not go unheard. A giant direct descendant of an ancient pterodactyl, 20 meters tall, lives in this gorge, and no sane hero would venture into it. So let this madman not think about challenging him, because it would take at least 3 heroes of the highest rank to defeat him, and he is alone. However, no one was going to listen to her because So Dojun knew that it was him who had the magical stone of an extraordinary level, and he was right, as was confirmed. But she just asked why he needed such information and whether he was going to go behind their backs and destroy him for the sake of such precious stones, because it was a real risk. He was, of course, a complete psychopath, but he definitely shouldn't have gone to eliminate the dangerous boss, seeing that he had been brought here not to do stupid things and take risks. The captain realized that she had taken on a real headache by bringing along a man for whom danger was meaningless, because he had already rushed ahead of her. The mere realization that he had rushed ahead took her breath away, because this psychopath had definitely planned something that could land her in prison afterwards. The team, of course, the heroine took responsibility as a strong and responsible warrior, because if any of them died, she would go to prison for negligence. Therefore, she had to run after this idiot as quickly as possible before he became a crunchy snack for the strongest boss of the fracture, becoming her ticket to prison. It was impossible to catch up with him because he was already at the foot of the cliff where Kazarian, the main monster boss in this area, lived. Jo Yeon was probably in a state of real panic for the first time in her long career because she had lost sight of a person who was incredibly important. She came to her senses much later than he did, but what she saw completely knocked her off her feet because she expected Dojun to die from his injuries. The damn giant dragon, which only 3 high-ranking heroes could have dealt with, lay lifeless in the clearing, its mere appearance terrifying everyone who saw it. The heroine couldn't answer the main question of what the hell had happened here, but it seemed that the brunette had managed everything even without her help or the help of the others. Now Ju Young understood that she was dealing with an unrealistically strong person, because it took tremendous power to defeat a monster like Kazarian. Even the highest-ranking hero, known more as the one who sent Kazarian to his death, Park Haeol, had a hard time with him. Even he had gone after this boss in the past, not alone, but with an entire regiment of 30 soldiers, but it didn't help him much. He lost his entire army and was left alone. He survived by some miracle when he lost his entire army, left completely alone in the middle of a world ravaged by monsters, and had to gather a new army as soon as possible. Realizing that he couldn't do it alone, he decided to take revenge, but he couldn't go alone, so he decided to recruit at least a few hundred soldiers for a new raid, gathering a total of about 200 A-rank heroes and 1 hero of the highest rank, like himself. He went to take revenge on his old enemy, but even here, everything was not so simple. It is worth remembering that they are just people born in a world limited in the use of mana and natural power, but modern humans are completely different creatures. Indeed, the enemy was very strong, and only an army of several hundred or even sometimes thousands of ordinary warriors, albeit strong ones, could stand against him. This creature was indeed significantly more powerful than any creation of human progress because it had an alien origin that was previously unknown. One of the first heroes of this world was of very high rank and endured enormous difficulties, but some boy who had recently entered his gates scattered Kazarian across the meadow. The giant pterodactyl was even more angry, burning everyone who opposed him with hellish flames. But the people did not want to die and surrender just like that. There could be no question of an easy victory, but if people really want something, they will unite for a common goal and bring victory closer, ultimately defeating the enemy. In the end, through tremendous collective effort, the enemy was defeated, but the casualties were truly enormous and could never be compensated for. No victory comes easily, and for every winner there are always at least hundreds of deaths, and the Pot Hyrule Guild still cannot recover. And now, before her eyes, a boy who has only recently entered the gates and been reborn like a phoenix is performing miracles that even high-ranking heroes are incapable of. They also look at her with hostility as soon as she dares to approach his prey, hinting that he does not want to share with her and will not because she is essentially just getting in the way. Of course, the team captain was very angry because such a reward could have been useful to each of them. But this boy privatized everything for himself. This was certainly very unpleasant, but she would never have believed what she heard if she hadn't seen with her own eyes how he knocked down the strongest boss. The fact that one man alone could destroy Kazarian, notorious for his cruelty and invincibility, with just one punch was frightening. Such a person is a hope for all of humanity, but also a threat. If he gets out of control, the world risks facing mass unrest in its structure. Because he could suddenly find himself in possession of the most valuable currency in the world, and he would rightfully claim everything he found after the battle. And the fact that he found the legendary crystal that only drops from the boss was confirmation that someone like Dojun could easily take control of the whole world. Now, of course, he didn't need the captains to guide him, so he refused their services and said that now each of them was free to continue on their own path as they wished. With that, they parted ways, but Ju Young still had a big question about the destroyed boss, who was left lying in the clearing, completely ignored. Korea's Purple Bullet asked if the brunette was going to take the remaining parts, as they were also very valuable, namely the beak and claws, as well as other parts of Kazarian's body. They just laughed at her and replied that they might be valuable, but they wouldn't bring in as much money as crystals, so let them pick them up if they wanted to. For the first time ever, Korea's national heroine was humiliated by being compared to a dog that picks up bones thrown away by its owner after a meal for the pet out of kindness. Dojun said that it would be much more effective to take the magic stones of other monsters, so let the rest of the artifacts be considered payment for navigation. The heroes were essentially turned into scavengers, picking up what was left after the big beasts had eaten, because no one would eat rotten meat. Dojun didn't need these body parts, so let his team of heroes divide them among themselves as they wish. He doesn't need scraps of meat, his stones attract him. Having said that, he disappeared into the cold greenish light of the mountains, heading off on his way, only to return in the evening with a rich catch and shut everyone up. And he brought with him huge backpacks filled to the brim with magic stones, which probably shocked not only me but also the seasoned heroes, who probably didn't think they would get anything. As for me, one glance at their bags overflowing with magic stones left me speechless because, my god, even the legends of the guild couldn't do that. One envious and shocked look on Jung In-ju's scarred face was enough to understand that no one could believe in the possibility of one person catching them all. There were at least 3 fairly successful and long hunts here, and the entire guild had to go on a raid for 24 hours and not come out for days. So no one could believe that the person the captain had brought with her was really a human being. And even if he was a human being, he was truly some kind of anointed one of God. This raised even more questions for Hyun Ju-yeon, especially for the dwarf with scars on her face. And it wasn't just about the number of stones brought by one person. The main problem was that, according to her so-called senior friend, this psychopath had single-handedly defeated Kazarian with his bare hands and without batting an eyelid. Such a victory alone promises. So Dojun the status of the strongest hero in South Korea, and it won't be long before he rises to the ranks of the strongest people in the world. Therefore, they understood perfectly well that now, without even trying, he could easily beat them all and leave them eating dirt without batting an eye. He is definitely not a simple man, and since Ju Yeon is the devil's amethyst bullet, the fact that she is so attached to him means that their relationship is definitely not simple, and that he is indeed a complex person. Therefore, this psychopath needs to be watched closely so as not to lose sight of such a threat, because he returned with only torn sleeves, and that's all. And maybe a slight smell of sweat from a hot summer day, and again a bag full of stones, but what the hell kind of hellish creature in human skin has gotten in here? Jung In-ju continued to stare at him as if he had committed some mortal sin. They had simply killed more monsters than the whole company had during the raid. Everyone understood perfectly well that if they told anyone about it, they would be considered crazy and locked up in a mental hospital. There was no point in spreading lies and scaring people with horror stories. However, it was still the case that she decided to reprimand the heroes of the day, and their dear Ju Young couldn't take her mind off this mysterious young man. The whole company was concerned that they were flirting with each other, and everyone agreed that their captain couldn't take her eyes off this strange guy. The whole group thought that they really looked good together because both of them were beautiful and strong people, so they looked like a couple. Only In-ju understood that it was difficult to call such things flirting, because her dear friend treated him like shit that was not even worth looking at. It took at least an iron will and high self-esteem to talk to the heroine like that, but this mysterious man simply thrust a bag of stones into her hands. And he left as if he gave away precious artifacts every day for charity. But no one knew about their deal except these two, which made it even more interesting. No one could believe that such a person would just take all the bags of stones and leave without saying goodbye, but that's how it was. He really was a legend. He just left the materials in their hands and walked away. Backpacks with such valuable resources are not given away just like that, so there must be some kind of catch behind the scenes. They were simply given several bags of elite stones. Such generosity is simply incomprehensible, out of the blue, as if the man had lost his mind. He could have used these stones and the glory of defeating the most dangerous boss to become a famous warrior himself, but instead, he gave the credit to others. So, if he wanted to, he could have taken the stones and left. It's hard to believe what kind of person you have to be to just give away so much money. These crystals could have provided him with a comfortable life on his laurels, but he just gave them away and left. So when asked what kind of person he is, the purple bullet remains silent. The girl could only blush, realizing that, according to the laws of the ancient world, a warrior who defeated an Amazon could always win the woman's favor as the strongest. There is one place where all heroes who ever have a chance to enter the ranking of the best fighters in the world train, and there, as always, it is hot and stuffy. Such places are never empty, because there are many warriors in the world who want to improve their rankings and skills before entering into battle against a stronger enemy again. The legendary hero known as the one who eliminated the boss of the Rift was here, trying to regain his former strength, but to do so, he had to try even harder. Park Hae-yeol was truly a legend of his time, the first in history to destroy one of the giant bosses of the anomalous split, and he honed his fists here. There is no such thing as perfection, so even he understood this and trained all the time, trying at least to keep himself in shape. But he understood that with age he would lose ground. The highest-ranking hero of one of the Sweet Life Guild associations understood perfectly well that he was in terrible shape and had lost a lot of ground recently during the lull. His assistant tried to calm him down, saying, "Don't worry so much because according to an ancient belief, a frog that crawls slowly will always jump higher than everyone else." The manager said that the more resilience he could find in himself during difficult times, the more Park Hae-yeol's reputation would grow in the future, so let everything take its course. Reassured by his manager, the former hero knew that by training, he would eventually be able to strike back at the scoundrels who now looked at him like he was dirt. The manager confirmed this by saying that, in time, his head would grow in strength, which would shake the awakened world. And then the time would come when everyone would fall prostrate before Park Hae-yeol. And the day would come when the question of how to defeat Kazarian would arise again. And he would be the one who knew the most in this field. But they had no idea about the death of the bird. None of them know that this bird has already been defeated single-handedly by a newcomer. And I wonder if the guild leader will be able to become a hero who defeated the boss of the crevice solo. And even if this happens according to the script, the Heroes Association will almost certainly award Park Hae-yeol exclusive rights. But how wrong they were. Park Hae-yeol was sincerely convinced that no one knew this enemy as well as he did, but I guess that there was a little man who had already shut him up. The problem is that the guild has shrunk significantly compared to what it was about 3 years ago, so this only increases the reward for victory. Therefore, Park Hae-yeol is confident that he can defeat this monster single-handedly if he puts in as much effort as possible in training, but again, he is very much mistaken. It is unclear whether they have their asses in their heads or their heads in their asses. But if the manager agrees with his boss, they say that he can really do it himself without help. However, none of them knew or guessed that the man who had already done what they had only planned, the mysterious So Do-jun, had appeared. Most of society had declared him dead, and now his personal information was in the hands of Kang Yoon-pyo, Kang Chul-woo's cousin, which was already an achievement. He was a hero of the highest rank, a member of the Heroes Association, whom the boss's cousin had tried to eliminate a couple of months ago during a period when he was unarmed at the gate. However, according to rumors, he had returned. And not only had he returned alive, but he had also awakened his power, which greatly interested Kang Yoon-pyo, and he wanted to hear more details. The elimination of So Do-jun was ordered by Hong Hee-ju, the executive director of T Group and the second daughter of the president of W Group, who wins in all respects. So why is she chasing after him? The question is obvious. This boy, So Do-jun, is the illegitimate son of the president of T Group, who was brought into the house as an orphan at the age of 7, but was kicked out after the birth of his son. This does not negate the fact that many wealthy families never valued their offspring, putting money and social status above them, which is, alas, a sad truth. Kang Yoon-pyo wondered how much money they were willing to pay to get rid of So Do-jun, his degenerate brother Kang Chul-woo. They probably shelled out a lot. The price for eliminating the target was set at 3 billion won, which is quite a high price for an illegitimate bastard, even if he is the president of a company. However, as I guessed, Kang Yoon-pyo's idiot cousin ultimately screwed up big time, but that was just the beginning because he was humiliated in every way possible. According to what the assistant knows, Kang Chul-woo was not only beaten, but his entire body was covered with burns. He was completely blinded and is on the verge of life and death. It sounds delicious, but even his cousin thinks it's not enough for such a freak. Although the blows were undoubtedly cruel, there's nothing to say about So Do-jun here. Of course, he tried even harder because if this is his cousin, then the right to beat him is a right given at birth, because the strongest always survives. And to be honest, if Kang Yoon-pyo himself had the chance to get even with his cousin, he would have ripped his arms off and turned his skull into a bloody mess at the same time. And what's more important is that, according to rumors, Hyunju Young was also seen at the scene, helping that very So Do-jun, which is already a red flag. If she got involved, then the reason for her help must have been really important, because a star like her shouldn't be hanging out with some nobody who just woke up. Therefore, Kang Yoon-pyo immediately began to question the manager about the relationship between the two. But the man could not answer anything, which is understandable, but he knows the following. Thanks to the testimony of Korea's first heroine, everything was hushed up. But that wasn't the answer because the boss needed to know what kind of relationship these two had. If there was no relationship, it was definitely an agreement, so the manager had to be loyal to the business, find out every last bit of information, and not miss anything. Now the situation is really turning around so that they are being hindered every day with increasing intensity, and the throne is beginning to wobble and crumble. Anger overflowed, and if there was no one nearby to crack and take out all the anger on, then the unfortunate iron golf club would be used instead of the spine. This meant that their absolute domination in this new world of heroes was coming to its logical end, which could not be allowed to happen. And since his brother had failed, it meant that very soon Hong Hee-ju would crawl to Yoon-pyo to finish off the degenerate idiot Chul Woo, who was already in the trash. Enough talk. Now it was time to think about how profitable a deal with one of the directors of the country's most famous firms could be, because the money was still in the family. Since she is one of the so-called chaebols, she must have a lot of money, and in fact, nothing will escape the Kang family, because they are known to have a huge grip on money. Meanwhile, So Do-jun was returning home, thinking about how effective it was to go to the rift. They hunt in neutral gates, and it would be worth repeating. The brunette understood perfectly well that hunting in the rift would be much more effective than picking up the leftovers and trifles of the so-called gates. And the risk was worth it because the rift was the source. Therefore, he could use Hyunju Young to get past the guards. He was in no hurry to break these ties because they were to his advantage in this complicated world. And in this world, as is understandable with chaebols and money, connections are important. Connections that can help you break through even from the gutter to the pedestal, and she could still be useful to him. Hyunjun warned that if the magical stones of Kazariana were sold, people would rush to find the original owner, and the media would not leave him alone, so he had to think carefully. And that's why she suggested keeping the stones with her for now, because if the brunette's goal is fame, no one will stop him, and then he can sell the stones. And at that very moment, without a word, So Do-jun thrust the bag with the magic stones into Ju-yeon's hands, leaving her with a silent question on her lips and confusion in her mind. So Do-jun decided that in order to avoid such conversations and situations in the future, he would have to find a way to get into the fault zones for hunting himself. Then, he would remain in the shadows. However, before starting a new investigation, it was worth taking a real rest in the new house that Hwang Chang-seop had prepared for him to move in with his family and live on. He hoped that a quiet evening with his young man would await him, but he pushed open the door to see something he certainly did not expect to find at this late hour. A whole mountain of rather expensive shoes adorned the threshold of his house, hinting that they had guests, and not just any guests, but clearly some serious people acting on someone's orders. As soon as he opened the door, he heard his younger sister scream with joy that her brother had come and that someone would protect her and their grandmother from the scary men who had barged in. There were indeed many people in the house dressed in formal attire, suggesting that the authority that had sent them was definitely not simple and had questions for him. The prosecutor sent by his stepmother, So Do-jun, arrived, along with the crazy blonde creature Hong Hee-ju, who couldn't calm down and sent her man. Yeonun immediately rushed to her brother because she was scared, and he, trying not to show his surprise, asked who all these people were and what they were doing here. Prosecutor Park Chul-yeon from the Seoul District Prosecutor's Office was talking to him and asked if he knew a man named Hwang Jong-seop because it turned out they were connected. It was unclear why So Do-jun was nervous, whether it was because they were on his trail or because his family would find out what kind of shady business he was involved in and where the money came from. The prosecutor, who was bribed by his stepmother, announced that Seo Do-jun was arrested for aiding Hwang Jong-seop of SEOHCS Capital because they were both involved in fraudulent operations. Hong Hee-ju revealed that her stepson was involved in fraudulent loan sharking operations with huge interest rates, along with Hwang Chang-seop, and he was taken to the prosecutor's office. Already sitting in the police station, tied to a chair, he realized that he had far more enemies than he could have ever expected, and that this creature had bought everyone off. So Do-jun found himself in a truly precarious position, but he listened to the conversations in the background, thinking about how he could turn even this situation to his advantage. Prosecutor Park Chul-yeon reported to a certain Director Lee that both Hwang Chang-seop and So Do-jun were cooperating with the investigation, so the situation was going smoothly and according to plan. It was an incredibly lucrative deal, because thanks to it, his daughter could now study abroad. Such a large bribe had been set for the deal. In this world, of course, money decides everything, so the large bribe was able to buy off even the authorities, and the police were reliably bought by the Chaebol Corporation. So Do-jun turned out to be the biggest and most terrible evil that everyone is now attacking, simply because he was born, and Korean businessmen already hate him. Park Chul-yeon thought that now he would really be able to do what his boss had assigned him to do, and get rid of the trash. That's what he called everyone who got in his way. Now that he had everything at his disposal, even a somewhat embellished dossier on So Do-jun, he could go as far as he wanted and pass judgment. After looking through the file, he didn't even know where to start, because according to the prosecutor, the young man had done so much that from the first pages alone, he could already be sent into exile. Now he was poking the young man in the face with Hwang Chang-soup's denunciation of him, trying to break him down so that he would finally give up, but it was clear that it wasn't working. So Do-jun kept up his act until the very end, his face expressionless, not showing a single emotion that could give him away, and he probably knew where to dig. The prosecutor continued to shout, looking at the emotionless face of the brunette, saying that if he thought the prosecutor was lying, he would now spill all the information about him. This case was the work of that rich bitch Hong Hee-ju from Chaebol, who had stirred up this whole mess, giving them another opportunity to run away and get themselves into trouble. The mention of this woman struck the prosecutor like an electric current passing through an iron pond, and he immediately asked who Hong Hee-ju was. So Do-jun. Judging by the reaction and mood around him, the whole gang of Han Cheong-soo was torn to pieces, but he didn't even show up and quietly passed by so as not to cause a fuss. But at this rate, the fuss is inevitable because the prosecutor is directly threatening him, saying that he considers the Korean prosecutor's office to be some kind of joke for fools. And he promised that for such jokes, the little guy deserves a good beating. And now he will definitely come to an end. But just one look from those terrifying amber eyes would be enough to scare anyone. Indeed, that look chilled him to the bone, so much so that even a grown man would wet his pants, despite all his military training. Park Chul-yeon was afraid of him. He couldn't let this pass. And indeed, the young man's gaze frightened him greatly. It was just an attempt to make himself look important, but his hands were tied, so he couldn't fight back. Therefore, the prosecutor was already about to strike the young man, but the unexpected creak of the door and the sound of approaching footsteps stopped him from taking a rash step. If he was going to hit him, he had to do it without witnesses. But as soon as the door opened, the assistant came in and saw the prosecutor with his arm raised above the young man, ready to strike. The assistant turned to the prosecutor, Park, and said that he needed his expert opinion on one matter and that it would be better for him to go with him now, because the matter was more important than ever. As soon as the prosecutor left and took up the case, he read something and shouted, asking what nonsense was going on here and what kind of tricks they were playing. The prosecutor, taking the document seriously, thought that the machine had broken down, but all the instruments were in working order and had even been inspected for possible malfunctions. However, no technical problems were found, regardless of what equipment was used. The hero's scanner said that this was an ordinary person, not a hero. So Do-jun definitely cannot be an ordinary person, and no one understands anything, so the information about his awakening is most likely just some kind of myth for the sake of noise. This cannot be the case because the information itself was officially confirmed by the highest authority, which handed the case over to the prosecutor's office, and Hong Hee-ju knows this. Since he knows such an important bigwig, So Do-jun is indeed a difficult man who can be very useful. Finally, So Do-jun was left alone and finally understood why Korean prosecutors are all called bastards, and the whole situation made him quite angry and tired. He wants to take his grandmother and Yeon-eun and get out of this country, destroying everything in sight, but then someone he definitely didn't expect to see in the monkey cage arrives. Hyun-ju-yeon, seeing such a colorful guest handcuffed to a chair, couldn't understand what he was doing there, and he himself didn't know what the hell was going on. Or he decided to pretend that he was a poor innocent white man who didn't know why he was being held. So he said that someone must have framed him, and that he definitely had nothing to do with it. Hyun-ju-young asked him not to make any rash decisions, but she understood that he was obviously upset about the use of force, and would make the situation much worse than it already was. So Do-jun sarcastically asked if she was going to help him, but Hyun-ju-yeon said that it wasn't exactly help, but she did know something. She knew perfectly well that the brunette had been deceived completely undeservedly, and she wasn't going to turn a blind eye to that, because So Do-jun was essentially his victim. The brunette smiled sarcastically, saying that of course it was nice that the main heroine of Korea was involved in such things, but why the hell was she interfering in such matters with the lower classes? The girl promised that the Association of Heroes would personally conduct an investigation to avoid false accusations, and that the actions of the unlicensed hero in the rift near his home would be taken into account. Hearing mention of his home, he immediately asked what was happening with his family, because he was most concerned about whether his grandmother and sister had been left alone. They had nothing to do with this situation, so they should be safe, to which Hyun-ju-young immediately replied, dissatisfied that she was not his secretary. Molly had to look after his family, but the malicious look in her cold amber eyes said that if he told her to, she would have to dance a polka in the air. Therefore, realizing that she could not escape responsibility, she decided that it would be better to take this man to where his family was, or tell him the truth. Realizing that this man's passionate gaze could not hide any secrets, she said that his family was safe, and he could not worry about it because they were alive. The brunette thanked her, and said that he would definitely repay this debt in the future, so she could rest assured that everything she had done would not be in vain. Despite everything, Hyunju-yeon said that the main thing for him was to hold on, no matter what, and that she would deal with all the issues as soon as possible so that they could move on. And so she decided that there was no need to prove So-do-ju's innocence through standard channels, but rather to approach it from a slightly different angle and dig through other channels. The women chose to expose the bribery of prosecutor Park Chul-yeol for handing down illegal sentences, which led to his dismissal and cleared Do-jun's name. An independent investigation confirmed that Do-jun had nothing to do with the crimes he was accused of, but he could not escape charges of performing heroic work without a license. Well, thanks to his defense, he was given a suspended sentence, but the situation in the world was escalating as monsters were once again terrorizing Great Britain, and there was a creature resembling a mantis. This monster was called Imicasian, which the brunette hastened to report, greatly surprising even the experienced heroine because he knew things that only heroes know. The girl gasped when she heard that he knew such things. It was a completely new monster, only the association knew its name. But he said it wasn't that difficult. It was easier to know because the names of monsters are not invented at will, thanks to the way information and energy flow through the cores of stones and DNA codes. Therefore, it was not so difficult to find out the true name of the monster because the analysis of the magical stone's matter reveals the monster's name along with the rest of the set. And modern Earth, having a sufficiently high level of technology, conducts this analysis with the help of scientific work, but in his fallen world, magic was used for this. So, as long as this world exists on Earth in parallel with the destroyed one, the same monsters will appear, and he knows most of the creatures, so there's your answer. Even before the names are revealed, Do-jun will know most of them, which can really amaze the minds of ordinary people, even though they soon became heroes in life. So Jun revealed that it is possible to deal with the Imicasians using an extract from red fire ants, and the mention of this creature greatly surprised Hyunju-yeon. Fire ants are harmless to humans, causing only minor irritation, but their venom is paralyzing to Imicasians. Just spray it on, and it's ready to go. At the very least, it would be possible to neutralize him in order to attack. But this did not concern the girl as much as another question of life and death. Of course, that was all well and good, but she wanted to know who this Mr. So-do-jun was, who knew so much that no one else on this planet could match. He remained silent, not even intending to answer her question, because he was already thinking about his own business, or simply thought that she was not worthy of such a revelation, and that it was his secret of origin. More precisely, the secret of the deal between So-do-jun and Karzarian. But the girl was still waiting for an answer from him, which most likely would never come because it was not her business. It seemed that the brunette wasn't listening to her at all, but after a few seconds he began to show at least some signs that he was in this world, and thinking. And then he said what would happen if he decided to kill Ho-hee-ju so that this damn creature would no longer bother him and put obstacles in his way. Ho-hee-ju herself was now on the brink of disaster because she had been cornered again, like a beaten dog, as her plans had collapsed like a house of cards. She thought that by bribing the police and other authorities, she would have an easy victory, but she was outsmarted because Do-jun had good protection. Manager Lee understood that now they would take it out on him for all the problems that were not his fault, and he was preparing to answer to his boss for such a failure. Now they had to do something about this situation, which had turned out very badly for them, but they still had to work with it somehow. The problem was that Korea's #1 heroine, according to all ratings, Hyunju-yeon, had gotten involved, and she definitely shouldn't have been on her radar. And what was she doing? The manager himself did not know how they had met, or what kind of relationship existed between Korea's national heroine and this nobody from the slums. Hong Hee-ju has already begun to lose her composure because it turns out that it is Ho Ju-young herself who is involved, putting a spoke in the wheel and biting her fingernail out of anger. This anger boiled in her small female body when she learned that her hated stepson was not a hero at all, even though he had awakened and was hunting. This whole situation was really stressing her out. Even if, according to eyewitnesses, this man had indeed awakened, he definitely had the ability to deceive the scanner. But there is also a high probability that the claim that So-do-jun is not a hero is just speculation and an attempt to evade responsibility for everything he has done. She is ready to pay tens of billions of won for his head if it means that Kang Yoon-pyo will immediately begin working on eliminating him. However, such a person is not willing to work for mere pennies, and realizing that the situation depends on him, demands that the amount promised for the elimination be doubled, if not tripled. Even his manager understands that doubling the amount is too much, but the hitman stops his manager by saying that this is the crux of the situation. After all, according to Hong Hee-ju, he is the only one who can eliminate the person she wants, and she won't even think about how the job will be done with money because she will be drowning in joy. Moreover, another character of the highest rank, Hyun-ju Yeon, has intervened, so the task has become much more complicated, and because of his intervention, more money needs to be paid. Hyun-ju Yeon, what can I say? These are really dangerous elements, so all the risks and precautions are absolutely justified in this situation, and he is right. The moment the owner slammed his lacquered shoe on the table with all his might, the manager flinched because he really said something he shouldn't have, but he didn't know. Kang Yoonpyo was furious that a piece of shit like his manager dared to think that all high-ranking heroes were the same, and that this girl would be just an appetizer for him. Of course, the manager made a mistake when he said that Hyun-ju Young was a strong opponent, and immediately said that he had no doubts about his boss's abilities. It is clear that the inability to control one's emotions is a family trait of the Kang clan, and seconds after his outburst of anger, he calmly asked what the association had to say. Glancing at the table with elite alcohol, the young manager said that the association had promised to increase payments due to the events in the UK, because the situation there is serious. Nevertheless, the association publicly stated that it would carefully select the heroes it was going to send to eliminate the anomaly abroad. Now it would be very difficult to say that they were paying too much for someone to do this, and that the people in the association were real gangsters, so you had to know when to leave. The departure was planned jointly with Japanese heroes, and the flight will be in 3 days, which is convenient for meeting up with a man named Takeshi on site. They will be dealing with a monster named Makasian, who is unknown at this point, and none of his weaknesses have been discovered, which complicates the task, but also increases the reward. So when Kang Yoonpyo defeats him, he will only become more influential. That is, he will rise even higher in the social hierarchy, so there is no point in refusing. Meanwhile, Britain is completely overwhelmed by the consequences of the rift that has opened up, because Cambridge is simply hell on earth, and the smell of death is in the air. Naturally, all the powerful heroes who were in Great Britain at the time were summoned there, but they could not stop the advance of such a gigantic monster. Makasian is something new for all of humanity, regardless of the country in which they find themselves, and it seems that there is no antidote against this monster. Even the most elite heroes of Great Britain understand that they are completely powerless against this creature, as their attacks bounce off Makasian's armored skin. Makasian responded to each attack with 100-fold, increasing the power of each of his attacks and taking revenge on the damned heroes for each blow they dealt him. The situation was truly dire, and without reinforcements they would surely have been defeated, but it was clear that international organizations would not abandon them. The British are in a completely shitty situation because they have to give it their all just to stay alive and defeat the monster with whatever they have in their arsenal. It's clear that without outside help, they won't be able to break through, even if there are mages in the British ranks, because without a clear understanding of tactics, they'll probably be useless. The enemy is too strong, and even if they try their hardest, most of what they can do is just scratch the armored corset of scales. The situation is really taking a turn for the worse because even experienced fighters with vast experience are now facing enormous difficulties. McCarthy was trying to destroy everyone who had the courage to stand up to him now, and without England's help, they would definitely not see tomorrow morning. With each blow, the monster became more and more ferocious, and neither the British nor the Japanese who were there could clearly know what to do with it now in order to survive. The British troops were clearly defeated, but it was too shameful to admit that they could not help their citizens. The situation was dire, but they were cornered, especially now that the giant spawn of hell was at the peak of its attack, which could be fatal for any of them. McCarthy seems to be in control of his mind, so he is in no hurry to attack just for the sake of destruction. His direct goal is to bring death and shed blood where people are. Therefore, one of the British heroines, a girl with silver hair, has practically become its direct victim, as its sting is instantly aimed right at her forehead. This was, of course, a direct hit that the girl would definitely not be able to dodge, and it is really understandable why Yoon Yeon did not want Do Jun to be a hero. Alas, death spares even the bravest heroes. Her scythe is the most incorruptible weapon in the world, which is impossible to lure away. The British, of course, learned about the ant poison quite late, but it was still possible to change something, so the heroes decided not to talk idly but to take action. Now the situation was taking a terrifying turn, and finding themselves in a terrible position, the British, as if trying, found themselves in a hopeless situation. The heroes of Great Britain wanted to move forward, but without reliable information, they quickly found themselves helpless and cut off from the world, which was a very frightening situation. And now that the front line in Cambridge has fallen, London, the capital, is only a half-hour walk away, and it's safe to say that London is close to collapse. In this world, information is the most valuable resource, So without it, you are completely lost and cannot stand up even to the weakest enemy. McCarthy isn't going to just wait around when he has such a significant prize for his bloody harvest right in front of his eyes. He can't afford to let a single person get away. He is completely torn apart by anger towards people and the feeling that his eternal hunger for fresh meat will finally be satisfied by all these people, whom an entire regiment will kill. Of course, there are many people, but London is not infinite, as we know, and against such massive monsters, they will certainly not be able to hold out for more than a few minutes, which is their sentence. Of course, the building can be rebuilt, but the human casualties and their number can only get worse because they cannot be replaced in a short time, and that is a tragedy. The monster was distracted by something flying in the sky that looked like a helicopter, and most likely it was the air force of an ally, meaning Korea had sent heroes. When the heroes arrived, they immediately saw what was happening in Foggy Albion, but Do-jun's gift of ant poison paralyzed the Macations on the spot. However, there were still some positive changes in this situation, as the red ant poison really began to work as it should and as planned. However, it couldn't be that this woman knew everything so thoroughly about the Macations, and something must be wrong here, even though it's a real hell. The British, of course, learned about the ant poison quite late, but it was still possible to change something, so the heroes decided not to waste time talking and to start acting. Ju Young led the army forward, and now none of them could guess that the one who gave them this information was So Do-jun, the very man they were branding. Without his help right now, the battle would probably have ended in complete failure, and without the necessary information about the red ant poison, Korea would have received the bodies of its heroes back. Instead of joyful and tense reporters and relatives of the heroes, there would have been a funeral procession to say goodbye to those who had once again saved the whole world. Of course, there were a lot of reporters here, and everyone was expecting them, but no one could have expected such a large number because everyone wanted to see them. To see those who saved the whole world, and no one expected anything else from Ju Young and all her subordinates, and no one doubted that it was she who saved Great Britain by force. And with her knowledge of what poison was needed to kill this monster, they were absolutely certain that it was Ju Yan who had found this weakness, without knowing that So Do-jun had told her. As a result, she saved England from complete destruction and is now a heroine on a global scale. There is even talk that the British royal family has taken notice. They want to grant Ju Young the status of a royal knight, and now she is a star who has lit up Korea with a soft, cool light. But who told her about the poison remains a mystery. Questions from the crowd about who helped her learn about the poison were very stressful because she was the one who kept their secret with So Do-jun, but now she is a hero. And in general, Kang Yoon-pyo became a hero who wiped out as many Macations as possible in this difficult battle, and everyone wants to know how he performed so well. And so, a squad of 200 soldiers, including Ju Young, returned home. And as the world now knows, the proud efforts of Korea's heroes saved Great Britain from complete destruction. The key element in hunting the Macations was the distribution of red fire ant extract in the air, which paralyzed the monster's movements. But no one knew that the person who gave Ju Young the secret of the red ant venom was So Do-jun, who clearly knew too much to forget it. Of course, he was pleased that the information he had given them had been useful, but he was definitely not so much interested in victory in Great Britain as in one very curious person, Kang Yoon-pyo, who greatly interested him as his true enemy after he eliminated his cousin Kang Chul-woo earlier in the restaurant. Now that Kang Yoon-pyo had appeared before him, So Do-jun knew exactly who was behind the attempts to prevent him from living and who he now had to destroy as well. However, it was Ju Young who remembered that he had given her important information, even though she understood perfectly well that she had to talk to her savior in such a way that no one would understand. And so, inviting him for coffee, the heroine of Korea presented Do-jun with several expensive-looking gift bags in gratitude for his help. So Do-jun thought maybe she had come on a date, but she brought him gifts. And of course he didn't mind, but he was very surprised because it was so unexpected. The girl said in a friendly and warm manner that the bag contained gifts for his grandmother and Yeon-yoon, and of course she did not forget him, so there were gifts for Do-jun as well. The guy pulled the bag toward him because he really wanted to see it right there and then, but Ju Yan said it would be better to look at it at home because there was no need to open it right away. And he was given a wonderful thing in the eyes of a person who loves fashionable clothes and likes to show off something popular and expensive. And it was a wonderful suit the color of sunny sand. Ju Young said that it was a gift for helping her, and now he should be happy because it was only thanks to him that she became a true heroine on a global scale. Compared to what Do-jun did for her, this suit is nothing, so if he wants a car for himself he should just say so, and he decided not to be modest and said he would let her know. Up to this point, the only question that interested the newly minted global heroine was where Do-jun got the information that red ants would have such an effect on her. However, he was not going to give any adequate answer to this question because he believed that his true identity should remain a secret, so she gave up. Ju Young wanted to know what he wanted to do in the future, and knew that the answer from this boy would be very strange because she knew him. He definitely has plans to target Yun Hee-ju and Kang Yoon-pyo, so she has to prevent everything, but then this machine of destruction says he wants to buy a house. It was an interesting request, but since she promised, she would fulfill it as requested. But she wondered if he was renting instead of buying outright. While Hyun-ju visited with gifts for the person who essentially helped her become a heroine in one of the wealthy mansions of the Kang clan, there was real fun to be had. Kang Yoon-pyo, of course, as always surrounded by beautiful girls, was essentially satisfied with his life, but something in his face revealed that it no longer made him happy. He understood perfectly well that Hyun-ju Young had become a completely different person, even if it was barely noticeable at first glance. But it could not be hidden from his passionate gaze. Because what happened in London haunted him, knowing about Macasian's weakness, and he couldn't even mention it without revealing where she had learned such valuable information. But most of all, he wanted to know what was going on with her and So Dojun, but the girl kept saying that she didn't understand what they wanted from her because they weren't connected at all. But Yoon-pyo understood that this woman had gotten him out of jail and planted Prosecutor Park, and most importantly, she was there when his brother was declared disabled. So Dojun was definitely attached to her, and Ju Young said that this idiot brought it on himself because Choul threw Dojun at the gate and broke the contract, but he was the first to jump in. He had his reasons. And now this hereditary thug said that his brothers were doing dirty work and it was no surprise that he would die in the end. However, no matter how the stars and intrigues turned out, this idiot is still Kang Yoon-pyo's brother, which the man hastened to remind him in a rather rude manner. And he hinted that he now had a legitimate reason to take revenge on So Do-jun. Hearing that the heroine of Britain tensed up for a split second. She knew very well that it was better not to mess with the Kang clan, where every second member was a brazen thug. But she herself was not afraid. She pretended that it was none of her business what they were going to do to each other. Tired, Ju Yeon leaned back in her chair and said that he could do whatever he wanted. She said it was none of her business. And anyway, why was he bothering her now? So the thug thought that the two weren't as close as he had thought and that everything was fine. Before he sadly put on his mask and fell asleep, the girl said that there was no need to interfere so he could relax. However, it was clear that he couldn't let it go, because if there was no need to interfere, it couldn't be that simple, since this woman was always full of surprises. So Do-jun will definitely have time to cause a stir. That asshole must be hiding something, and it's their secret, announced again by the heroine of Britain and the whole world. Of course, they will keep quiet about this for a long time, but now that everything is calm in Korea, another round of tense drama is beginning in Britain because the rift remains. In England, in the Lincolnshire area, they have just finished construction and cleanup because it was devastated by a flood of monsters. Their portals didn't work, even though they tried to collect as many as possible. They were unable to collect enough stones to provide protection during the second wave, because the dam rift destroyed many heroes, which was a pity, of course. The bad thing is that they didn't have red ants, so even they, insignificant as they were, could have finished off a couple of monsters which even the rank and file regretted. But the problem is that the rifts from which the wave escaped cannot be turned into gates, so the shop is closed, and in the second wave there will be even more terrifying creatures. The fact is that most of the countries have been wiped off the map, but now someone has come for them, and a huge shadow is breathing down their necks, hinting that it will be painful. It seemed as if someone had come out of the portal, and the British soldiers who were on patrol thought that the inspection team should have returned, but it was too early. His partner said that he was being paranoid for no reason, and that he should focus on his work, because now civilians who were eager for mana stones would rush in, and there would be fun. But none of the workers knew how terrible the events unfolding behind their backs were. A real apocalypse that the ordinary soldiers knew nothing about. Naturally, the first emotion that everyone here felt was fear. A primal fear that always arises when you see something that shouldn't be there. And indeed, you, a creature that emerged from the rift in this world, should not exist. Something that came out of the rift looked so alien, it resembled the devil. The creature's appearance was certainly unpleasant, with so many scars crisscrossing its ugly face, a frightening black aura, and an ugliness that even powerful spells could not hide. The poor soldiers had not yet recovered from the previous shock when they realized that this was definitely not a hero. The clothes and scars spoke to the contrary. Help was needed, so they reacted quickly. They needed to contact headquarters as soon as possible, but it was clear that this terrifying creature would not let them do so, and they prepared to strike their enemies. The soldiers immediately realized that they were in a very disadvantageous position when they began to be attacked with magic attacks, and they were completely powerless. They could only fire their firearms, but it was clear that this would be completely useless, as they were essentially already dead. The creature that emerged from the portal sensed that this world was very different from what it was used to seeing at home. But here too, it could run wild. No matter how hard the soldiers tried to stop them with at least some kind of projectile weapons, it would all be in vain, as it would be pointless to tease the wind with metal. Their insignificant attacks did not even scratch the creature's protective field, and it simply became angry that some flies were laughing at it when it was, in essence, the absolute. And all those who are now trying to strike some kind of blow are nothing more than trash that deserves to be crushed like dung flies. Naturally, the poor soldiers probably only had a few short moments left to live, because a single electric shock could cause complete paralysis of the body. And of course, the Absolute's direct attack on the British soldiers did not take long to materialize. The strongmen immediately collapsed with heart attacks and organ ruptures. The last thing that could be seen on their faces before their agonizing death was a grimace of horror and despair at their inability to somehow prevent their terrible fate. Naturally, the creature that burst into this world really did have plans for it, wishing to completely subjugate the Earth to itself after the unknown world, and it carried with it only destruction, death, and ruin to everything in its path, so the world would be destroyed no matter how hard they tried to prevent it now. However, there was something that greatly disturbed the visitor, who did not understand how this could be as so many years had passed, and he was still stuck in one place with nothing. Judging by the calendar of this world, about a decade had already passed, but he still hadn't achieved even a measly 20%. What was he doing wrong on his path? Absolute did not understand. Was this really a failure, even after everything he had gone through to create these damned spatial rifts? First, he needed to develop. And first of all, increase the concentration of mana. However, there is a creature that has decided it can talk to him and is whispering, trying to find out who this stranger is. The poor soldier wanted to know what kind of creature he was dealing with. Even if it was the last thing he could say in his life, he was on duty, which was commendable. So the stranger realized that the first thing he had to do was to kill all the annoying flies that were now crawling into his mouth and face, blocking his view. In a small corner of South Korea called Paju, at first glance, everything seemed normal, or so it seemed. It was just a base, what else could you say? However, it was naive to believe that they would simply be allowed to conduct training, or that these people had something in mind, since there was one curious person who would not leave them alone. So Do-jun had long since become synonymous with a magnet that attracted trouble and anomalies wherever he was, and this time was no exception. His intuition was superbly developed, and most likely he went back to the rift, understanding that only there could he obtain a decent amount of magic stones. And again, some creatures, clearly originating from the hellish division, began to burst out of the ground, breaking the usual calm picture of this world with a loud roar. It wasn't that this was unexpected for such a space, but it was still nice that there was at least something here worth trying and working harder for. And yes, So Do-jun came here to hunt, so the creatures that grew out of the ground like mushrooms after rain did not surprise him at all, quite the contrary. After all, this man was one of those who knew why they had come, and he knew that this territory would clearly not be a field of fragrant daisies. Judging by his careful and thoughtful tactics in surveying the area, it was clear that of the 100 monsters promised on this map, only about 26 remained to be erased. So, since it was so hot, let them experience his new ingenious technique, and then they would be able to see which of them would prove to be more adaptable. As they say, a genius is a genius in everything, and using his magnificent fireball technique, Do-jun would now show them the advantages of humans over monsters. Let the purge begin. A smart person would never rush up a mountain. They would go around it, so he decided to purge the pit with these freaks using his already well-known fire. At first glance, it seems that the round, toothy worms have simply quieted down and gone underground, but in the next second, real madness will begin for all these freaks. And immediately, from all the burrows that were on the location, fiery sparks began to fly out en masse, which would not be long in bringing about fiery remains. So Do-jun was right when he decided to use fire, because in that very second, burning bodies of ringed underground worms began to fly out from under the ground. The brunette watched spellbound as events unfolded before his eyes, and indeed, what was happening and its intensity could not fail to please the genius. It turned out that he was able to wipe out absolutely all of the monsters on this map, leaving not a single one alive, so all the stones were his personally and completely. As always, there is never a quiet day in the Heroes Association. There are always debates going on, and today is no exception, with another event taking place. And of course, today's agenda features none other than the legendary new unknown hero named So Do-jun, who is simply an anomaly in this world. The chairman naturally wanted to know the opinion of his associates about this man, so he gathered a whole council here to discuss what to do with this young man. To be honest, opinions about him were divided. Some said that he was simply a hero who could not be identified by the system's sensors, while others said that he was just a mischievous boy. In general, he is now annoying everyone. He is considered a scoundrel who thinks he is above answering the association's questions, as Vice Chairman Park Song-cheol said. And there is something else to add about this curious young man. We need information that could reveal as many new details about his biography as possible. In general, there would be something to discuss there, even though the information obtained by Min Honggi, deputy director of the association, was not that important. But there is one nuance. As So Do-jun said, everything that is happening is also happening with the villainous plans of a character named Kang Chul-woo, who is also quite an interesting character. So Do-jun is also a complex character because he has at least a few tricks up his sleeve that he is not going to reveal, and his story is vague. This is a man who, upon entering the gates where ordinary people are usually torn to pieces, managed to survive and even emerge from there as an absolute hero, reborn and strong. So Do-jun took revenge on Kang Cheol-woo himself and then single-handedly cleared the new rift in his native Mapo district, which became the impetus for a new turn of events in the story. This behavior is undoubtedly provocative in every sense, but one can conclude that this man is truly extraordinary and should be noticed. Therefore, they have no right to ignore the fact that he possesses truly outstanding abilities, even if he does not obey any single structure. The director acknowledged that he is indeed a wild stallion who does not yield to anyone, but at the same time, he is a magnificent horse for whom they have simply not yet found a bridle that fits. Why did this man also request an official hero license? But they said to skip this procedure if there is a so-called guarantor. But who is this guarantor? This is not just any person, but the highest-ranking heroine, Hyun-ju Young, whom the hero asked to be mentioned personally in his demands for the future. This is certainly newsworthy, as it is quite extraordinary for a heroine of the highest rank to stand up for a boy from a poor, forgotten neighborhood. She wouldn't do it just like that if it were some ordinary idiot from the street, so it's worth thinking about how to get this person on your side. The game is worth the candle, and the one who is destined to become the greatest hero in the world is indeed this young man with burning amber eyes and an iron will. He really did receive his hero's certificate, and not just any certificate, but a golden one, because he really is of very high rank, not the highest in the country, of course, but close. As a warrior of the highest rank and one of the 10 strongest in the country, he basically got access to what he wanted so badly and could be satisfied. The director of the association found the whole situation with him going to one of the largest rifts very funny and literally burst out laughing. But he was a kind man who understood that this was an energetic young man who, immediately after certification, headed to the Faju rift, and that was commendable too. But this man's determination was also worth paying attention to, because he entered one of the most serious rifts completely alone, without a guild or a team, like a madman. The deputy and the director himself responded with a silent pause and slight smiles on their faces because they knew that there was no point in panicking and that they just had to accept what had happened. The vice chairman calmed down and, realizing that he had overreacted, made a fair proposal to the two of them regarding what to do next. If So Do-jun returned alive from this rift, he would be promoted in rank, and it would be announced because he was, after all, one of the 10 strongest players, so why skimp on that? However, the vice-rector said that it would be better to ask the young man himself what he wanted and to get his permission, because he was unlikely to be chasing power and fame. It was decided to listen to the deputy because such thoughts were generally inappropriate, and the appearance of a new hero could give people hope in such difficult times. The chairman certainly understood what his colleagues were leaning towards, but he still had his own idea about how to proceed, and he was about to announce it. First of all, before making a final verdict, he wanted to meet with So Do-jun in person to talk to him face-to-face about all this. And perhaps it was the most appropriate decision to go to the same rift to find the hero there and discuss with him what he thought about being promoted further. After all, anyone who knew this man personally knew that he was only interested in things that could increase his power. And if it wasn't useful for that, then it wasn't useful at all. If you didn't interest this individual properly, he would never even consider the best possible offer you made him. First of all, he will think about what benefits he will get from it, because otherwise, no one in this world does business or works out of altruism like he does. At first glance, he may seem like a surprisingly wonderful young man, but he acts purely on the basis of logic, which anyone would need. And now that he has cleared the entire location of monsters, he could perhaps discuss what to do next and take a break after a long battle. Of course, the young man is exhausted because there were a lot of monsters, and they were not simple creatures that are found in every location, but true treasures. However, he killed them all, even though I understood that it took a lot of strength, and even his knees were shaking from the unfamiliarity because, although he had a lot of mana, it was still not enough. Finally, he could shake the annoying blood of the enemy from his hands and get rid of the tiresome fire that greatly depleted his mana reserves when used constantly. So Do-jun suspected that this would happen. His mana reserves were too low to continue like this, so he needed to get at least some kind of weapon. Naturally, in order to bring his plans to life, he had to go to some official establishment where they could help him with his task. And naturally, That location would be the Kasan Heroes Complex, where he could find someone who could handle the job better than other street hustlers. So the poor merchant would probably have sat there bored with his stall if the doorbell hadn't suddenly rung, promising that a visitor had arrived, and it was time to get to work. The employee, who was not answering his phone, asked the visitor to give the name under which the order was placed, but the next shock awaited him from what he saw. So Do-jun threw a bag with all the non-artifacts he had collected earlier on the table, asking the blacksmith to make some decent weapons out of them, but the blacksmith didn't care. The man simply said that if there was no reservation, it would not be accepted, so he should take his materials to another smithy if he wanted to. Do-jun was not going to put up with such insolence, so he asked if they had said that there were too many orders and if the blacksmith himself had answered his call. The man, dissatisfied that he had been torn away from his beloved game of playing with his phone, said in clear Korean that there were no vacancies. He didn't have time, so he told this strange guy to find someone else, because all the craftsmen here were masters of their craft. But then they grabbed him by the scruff of his neck. Just like a mangy kitten, the blacksmith asked what the hell this visitor was doing, and the gloomy brunette asked if this gambler was the owner, but it was his son. Do-jun, holding the man who was many times his size by the scruff of his neck, told him to bring his father here immediately because he had come on recommendation and would not have come otherwise. And so the blacksmith's dissatisfied son followed his father thinking, well, they distracted him from such an important game, and who is this little boy who definitely won't buy anything worthwhile? So he immediately shouted to his father to come down because there was a visitor who thought he was worthy of the honor of seeing the best craftsman here. The senior blacksmith, who was just as dissatisfied as his son, asked what had brought this kid here, and Choi Chol-wang doesn't just chat with customers for no reason. So Do-jun replied to the master of making weapons for heroes that he had been recommended by none other than Hyun-ju-young herself, and he would not let him off the hook so easily. A connection to Korea's very first heroine was truly something incredible, so letting such a customer slip away would be a real crime for both men. Since he came from such an important person, let him show what he has in his backpack. Maybe there really is something worth working on in the future. And indeed, what he began to take out of his backpack was truly a valuable relic, because, as we know, Do-jun would not pick up junk. The elderly master's eyes popped out of his head at what he saw, because what the young man took out of his backpack was indeed a most valuable artifact. Naturally, the son was curious about what had caught his father's attention so much, since he had expressed his admiration aloud, and wanted to know what kind of thing the customer had brought. As it turned out, the mysterious tusk that the brunette had pulled out of his bag was not one but two tusks of a giant black salmon, and there had not been anything like this for a long time. The client wanted a decent sword made from this fang, preferably as long as possible, but the craftsman responded with some skepticism. An experienced craftsman warned that with such a non-metallic material, it would be impractical to make a sword longer than a couple of medium-length blades, as it would lack strength and durability. But they were in for a surprise from the visitor himself, who said that the craftsman probably recognized that such delicate work was beyond their capabilities and were trying to dissuade him. Do-jun stood his ground, saying that the two pieces needed to be fused together somehow to make one blade, that he needed the length, and that the length had to remain unchanged. The black-haired brat's demand made even the experienced craftsman's nerves boil, and their veins bulge because he asked to increase the mana capacity. And then the son flew into a rage, defending his father from the visitor, saying that his father did not have sufficient skills and that his creations mainly possessed third-level mana. Well, it's good that he said that, but without confirmation, it's impossible to say for sure what level it is, and maybe they're trying to deceive him now. So he grabbed one of the first balls he came across to determine its level, and it turned out that this weapon was not bad in principle, but not what he needed for his power. If his feelings were to be believed, this blade should be somewhere around the 5th level in terms of mana absorption and use, but he would now test it in one way. The moment the young man's hands gripped the blade of the sword, it glowed brightly with a golden light, as if it were ready to explode into pieces from his strong grip. Before the eyes of the masters who had probably spent more than one night making this sword, the young man began to completely destroy the result of those long, sleepless nights. And indeed, unable to withstand the pressure of the mana emanating from the body of this mysterious guest, the unfortunate sword simply cracked into pieces. And this was direct proof. It showed that they weren't just dealing with another mama's boy who decided to show off in the smithy, but a truly worthy person who deserved respect. Do-jun rightly said that if this was the only thing the master was capable of, then he should retire because he would not last long in his position. As unpleasant as it may be, even the master himself could admit that he had made a mistake somewhere, and that he really needed to listen to the advice this young man was giving him. Most likely, he did have an effective weapon after all, because the next destination was a swamp where the most dangerous beast was already raging. Of course, the creature had no intelligence, because what mountain troll has even a shred of brain power? But it is truly a machine for wiping civilizations off the face of the earth. The basic skills of this creature are bloodthirstiness, stupidity, ferocity, and enormous physical strength, as well as a nasty, loud roar that can be heard throughout the entire area. So Do-jun, coming out of his cozy hiding place, said that this was indeed what he had expected, and that this creature was indeed incredibly noisy, and nothing else could be expected. The swamp orc is a huge beast with practically zero intelligence, but it fears fire like the devil fears holy water, which the young warrior would take advantage of immediately. Naturally, this was a provocation, and the troll rushed to attack him as soon as he saw the irritant, but the target was much faster than the attacker, and Do-jun escaped. He had a lot of advantages in speed, weight, and attacks, of course, because fire attacks are always better than a stupid physical ram and waving your arms around. Air and aerial attacks are truly the crown jewel of Do-jun's abilities, so he rushed to establish his superiority in the air as quickly as possible. Now, sad times were coming for the swamp monster, because the blow from his magic-enhanced hand was able to inflict a slashing wound on the monster's chest. Naturally, the swamp troll screamed loudly because the pain was intense, but it was not so easy to eliminate him, because pain is the best stimulant in battle. Therefore, when an electric impulse touched the swamp monster's brain, it hastened to clench the pole in its hands to use it like a spear for throwing. It was a rather clever move from someone who essentially lacks intelligence, but it was to be expected that such a strong opponent would even break a spear. There could be no advantage in battle for the troll because the legend, who would one day ascend to the pedestal of this world, was truly involved here. The monster found itself in a very difficult situation, frightened and cornered by this small but very strong boy with his fiery tricks. Here, the truly ingenious tactic of knowing the enemy worked, because trolls are essentially very afraid of fire, which worked as a psychological trigger. Of course, someone who came from another world and knew perfectly well about all the creatures that appeared on Earth long before his rebirth would have a lot of advantages. And most importantly, the incision in the troll's muscle tissue paralyzed him for a second, distracting his attention from the most important point on his back, where the next attack would come from. And indeed, it was necessary to strike right between the shoulder blades because that is where the largest concentration of nerves is located in both humans and trolls. So the internet aimed there. Between the shoulder blades was the Achilles heel of the giant's body, which, without causing significant damage to the body and its contents, could inflict such devastating damage that it would result in instant death. The victory over the troll was truly lightning fast because a single blow to one point was enough to knock his head off his shoulders without any bloodshed or significant physical effort. Of course, he would have managed because this man had no other choice but to be able to withstand a decent amount of mana for a long time. But he was not immortal, because sooner or later fatigue sets in, and strength must be replenished somehow, which he would have done if he had at least had food. In the end, the Cyclops was defeated. So, in principle, everything was as it should be, but fatigue still cast a shadow on his already exhausted shoulders. Do-jun felt perfectly well that maintaining such a level of mana for a long time was a really difficult task, and that he needed to train his body to increase his attributes. But first and foremost, it was worth remembering that he had achieved the impossible, so he deserved to take his trophy, no matter how frightening it might seem what this man would do. It would seem that he could have drunk the blood of the defeated orc, which would have been logical given that he was scooping blood from his body. But no, he made a different decision. Smiling maniacally at the reflection of the bright red blood in the glass, he was pleased that, despite the difficulty, he had defeated the Cyclops that had been tormenting him for so long, and the first thing he did after the fight was over and the rift was sealed was to go to the very same armory where he had ordered that sword. Of course, the blacksmiths already knew what kind of customer was coming and expected this man to pull some kind of trick, but a glass of blood on the table was something new. Naturally, the blacksmith did not understand what this red stuff in the glass was and was told that it was a substance that could glue the fangs of Black Salmos together. The younger blacksmith was supposed to pass this information on to his father, but when asked if this was really true, the visitor simply left without answering, leaving another mystery unsolved. In order for the entire set of basic materials to be complete and to increase the level, you need a special thing that can only be obtained in one place in the world. This is probably the most elusive item, which can only be obtained with the permission of the person above him, and that person is Hyun-ju-young. Who else? At that moment, she was probably enjoying life by the pool, as befits a member of the golden elite of society, which she basically deserved. Naturally, a call from a very curious person dispelled the boredom that the girl had probably succumbed to in this rather monotonous place in the heat. So Do-jun certainly didn't call just like that, and when the girl picked up the phone, she asked what he wanted, but what he said immediately threw her out of her peaceful slumber. Just the mention of Brazil as a place this strange young man wanted to go made her shudder because, well, it's not like the US, it's more dangerous. Did she really need to occupy her mind with such problems right now in the middle of a resort? Problems that, as a high-ranking heroine, she didn't need at all? She would have said, sit on your deck chair and think about what to drink next. But instead, she thought about what excuse to use to send the Hero Association to South America for the trinket. Jun Young asked her partner, Young In, if it was true that the Hero Association had sent an expedition to Brazil and that the Brazilian government seemed to be panicking. Because they realized that they couldn't do anything there themselves due to the high danger of monsters, they decided that it would be better to close access to the rift, even though the stones there are valuable. But these aren't just stones. They're mana stones, and the association pays well for their destruction, so they're going there, and Ju Yan should go too and take the young man with her. The more people, the more fun it is, and the more he must be a very high-class warrior. In truth, no one knows his true level of power because he is secretive. The little brat with a scar across her face continues to pester him. They meet, and she doesn't need to hide anything because she knows everything from her trip to Britain. The little girlfriend's questions are getting really annoying, so the lady with purple hair decides it's better for her to leave, and she goes on an expedition to Brazil. However, it was impossible to say for sure about this guy because who knows if he will go with them or not. He is really very self-centered and you can't understand him. The blacksmith was also shocked that the boy had figured this out and that the blades could be joined together with some kind of magical glue. This material had to be handled with great care, and what's more, this cunning young man had somehow learned that only the blood of Cyclopses would be effective here, and nothing else. This guy is really not as simple as he seems, so it will be fun with him. And he still has his own requirements for weapons that he will not compromise on. Naturally, the blacksmith will now do as the customer requests, and the length of this sword will be about 1 meter 80 centimeters, and it is better for it to be two-handed. But in order for it to be usable with one hand, it also had to weigh about 5 kilograms so that his hands wouldn't fall off and his back wouldn't hurt from carrying it. Of course, the blacksmith was shocked that the customer had suddenly become so pleasant. Maybe he was really a good person, even though he seemed rude. Maybe the weapon was important. The master thought that such a weight would be very heavy and it would be impossible to use it quickly. But the brunette agreed to everything and asked how long the work would take. A weapon of such complexity would take about a month to make, so the mana absorption rate would have to be at least 7 in order to fully utilize the power of his body. And he would need the same plan that had been proposed for the trip to Brazil, and now he would take it on, just to return with the necessary ingredients for the work. Knowing this man, he would not return without what he wanted. So it was better for the blacksmith to work on improving the ball, but he would only be able to increase the absorption level with a complete set. Of course, good weapons were always valued in Vika, but the fact that a person is truly serious about going to the other end of the planet for materials is a strong desire. Someone who wants something will always find a way to do it, while someone who doesn't want it will find excuses not to do it. And that was the case when this man decided to take action. Of course, the journey, as always, began at the main station, and there a rather pleasant surprise awaited him, and it was clearly not for his good looks that he received it. A brand new luxury car was brought to the parking lot, which most likely just came out this season and was already in the hands of the hero with full ownership rights. So Dojun promised that he would use this car wisely because it was quite an expensive gift, and Hyunju really helped him out. The girl told him to relax and asked pointedly if he really thought she meant nothing to him, and he just asked for 100 million. But damn it, he replied that yes, that's right, he just asked her for money, and she, like a fool, helped him. But we mustn't forget that this woman has questions, and she will ask them because there are some things that, despite her romantic infatuation with this man, the heroine would definitely want to know personally. While the brunette was maniacally examining his new car, she asked him directly what had happened between him and the Heroes Association, if he was being completely honest, that he had turned his back on them so abruptly. And Dojun simply replied that they had threatened to reveal his identity, and he had simply told them to pay for their words, but Senator Nat Vance certainly pays a lot. He calmly replied that maybe that was true, and that he would just do what he wanted. The brunette got on her nerves, and she said that he just shut up. In general, he should have at least a modicum of respect for the person who literally sponsors all his antics. But he can't even show that and takes advantage of her sense of duty. After grumbling a little and getting angry at her partner, who obviously can't accept what she does for her, the girl still got in the car to talk to him. Hyunju Yun informed him that the association wanted to send them to Brazil, and when everything was over, maybe the brunette would want to talk to the senator again once he calmed down. After asking again if it was definitely Brazil, Do Jun received the answer that the situation there was indeed very serious and that the government had blocked off all the fault lines. Finally, there was at least one thread connecting these two, and even though their hands were literally touching and they were close, he was concerned about one thing. Do-jun was only concerned about whether Ju-yan also wanted to go to Brazil. For her, of course, this gesture meant much more than it did for him, but still, yes. The girl said that of course she would go there and asked why he was asking such an obvious question, and she would probably have liked the answer very much if it weren't for Do-jun's essence. Who knows, maybe this man also had feelings for her, but most likely it was pure pragmatism, because he suggested going to Brazil together as a team. At least he made one woman blush like a schoolgirl in his lifetime, Maybe it was even a kind of invitation to a safari-style date. But there was another woman in this world who blushed at the mention of Do-jun. But most likely, it was anger that caused Hong Hee-ju's face to flush because of her stepson. Kang Yoon-pyo now felt like a star because he was the only one in his clan who possessed any useful information that could help. He asked her sternly if Ms. Hong Hee-ju wanted to know more, and said that now was not the time to change the terms of the contract and that he was asking for more money. He had already received 30 billion, so the blonde asked if he was going to get to work, thinking she had made a mistake in hiring this scum. Kang Yoon-pyo asked how many people besides him would agree to do this job, since there are many mercenaries on the market who are willing to do dirty work without asking questions. But in his humble opinion, their agency has little chance of success because they greatly underestimate their opponent, since Do-jun is definitely not a simpleton. He has the highest rank and is one of the 10 best heroes in South Korea, which caused his stepmother to literally have a hysterical fit, because such an idiot could not be a hero. First of all, the Kant clan's thugs were paid for information, and now the company's director, Hong Hee-ju, must be seriously afraid for his life because of Do-jun's rise. Having said that, Yoon-pyo cast his line and was about to leave when the blonde woman called him back, asking the mercenary not to leave, because she would definitely end up in a complete mess. If all this is true about how powerful her stepson is, then she will definitely have no choice but to lie low and tremble like a flea. Hong Hee-ju understood perfectly well that since her stepson already had such a high level of power, she herself would not survive, so she would pay any amount of money to have something done about it. The bait was cast perfectly, so Kang Yoon-pyo said that money was good, but he would like to be partners with her in the future, knowing that he would get everything. Indeed, this blonde was ready for anything as long as the hated Do-jun died and stopped bothering her with his worthless existence and further in life. It seems that the situation is now developing in their favor, because they received a phone call informing them of the start of a very important expedition to which heroes of rank C are invited. Naturally, the hated Do-jun will also go there, and you expect that the hired thug will also say this, as the woman has literally backed herself into a corner. But Kang Yoon-pyo remained silent, keeping up the intrigue before saying a phrase that would turn the world upside down and the already cornered woman's world upside down. The thug said that it seems she was born under a lucky star, because now is the only chance to make her wish come true. If the cards fell as he had planned in his head, it would truly be the best chance to get rid of the cursed cockroach, so Do-jun, forever. It was a risky overseas voyage because the best heroes were thrown into the meat grinder and sent straight to the jungles of Brazil, and it was something of an experiment. It was a truly innovative step because the Korean authorities had never before sent so many valuable personnel on such long flights, especially to sunny Brazil. They even sent a really important person named Jang Sung-ho, who had reached the top in business and was flying to Brazil because he thought he could make a lot of money there. Naturally, the flight did not go unnoticed, and Park Ho-chul, as part of the elite Korean guild, decided to go there to remedy the situation. And where would we be without Hyun Jung-yeon, who most people have probably already elevated to the rank of goddess, while others think it's time for her to take a break, so to speak? And where could they go without Kang Yoon-pyo? Because the matter is very serious, and they say that if they succeed, the mana stones collected there will last for a long time. But no one knew that he was pursuing a completely different goal, and that goal is now sitting in a black hoodie, eagerly devouring noodles as if he had just happened to end up here. So Do-jun. Of course, no one knew, but it was only to his advantage. This mission would be new for him, and everyone thought he would be able to show good results. If they sent him to Brazil, then he is definitely below all the big shots flying here, and it seems that there really will be no competition for a place here. Korea sent its best heroes to Brazil, the 5 most magnificent of all time, so no one knows what lies ahead for the whole group. Some of them are flying simply because it's part of the mission, some can't wait to restore the former glory of a long-dead guild, and some are keeping an eye on someone. There is also one person who is involved in a conspiracy by the biggest shots to compete with Korea's new rising star and eliminate him once and for all. There is one very ambitious young man who has traveled to the distant lands of South America to obtain the thing that will finally bring him closer to his desired sword. Without a doubt, they are each pursuing a noble goal in their own way, and soon the plane will land in sunny Brazil and the real hunt for survival will begin. Brazil is a country of incredible beauty, and just as quickly the landscape of rainforests gave way to the concrete jungle of São Paulo, where the thick of the action is. The Brazilian National Association of Heroes is already in an uproar at the summit due to the natural crisis of capable units after they were sent into the depths of the rift. The situation is certainly like a fuse on a powder keg, but the good news is that the Korean forces have long since arrived at the airport and are disembarking, because these guys are the fastest. And in general, some heroes skipped the necessary preparation and rushed into the thick of events, and it seems that rushing is already in their blood. This is certainly good, but we need to make sure that these Koreans don't find out anything personal because otherwise we will have to violate international criminal law, and that is dangerous. It seems that at first there is nothing suspicious here, but it is better to keep an eye on these guys until they finish their work and everyone agrees. But there is one problem. One of Brazil's national heroes, Marias, fell in battle against an unknown creature that left him nothing but a mummy. And that's interesting. The nature of the killer is such that even if it seemed like a monster, it was a completely different creature in nature, one that a simple mind cannot understand. This creature is actually much older than the very matter of this world, and it is not the first time it has put a spoke in the wheel, trying to pass through the rifts, even though its flesh has already been cut. And this creature clearly had an anthropomorphic silhouette and appeared in the Santorum Rift, leaving no one alone in their thoughts about what exactly had happened. Meanwhile, before throwing the heroes into the thick of battle, they were gathered for an introductory meeting to learn more about where they were going to be sent today. Hyun-Ju Young was on pins and needles because the person she had come here for was missing, but the briefing had already started, and the highlight of the program was nowhere to be found. This genius decided to change planes because the real destination was far away, and now she was caught between two fires again because Do-jun had gone into the rift. Well done, of course, but he went there alone, and the whole team was supposed to go there in 2 days and not to this wormhole, but there was one person among them who couldn't keep up. As they say, they didn't come here to relax and drink on the azure coast of Rio, so they lifted their heroic asses and rushed forward to meet the rift and the monsters. Hyun-Ju Young, feeling like she was the mother of a wild child, was already getting into a taxi to go where the completely crazy Do-jun had gone. But she couldn't just leave like that because there was one wonderful comrade named Kang Yoon-pyo who was nervous about her sudden movements towards Do-jun. The man didn't understand where she was going so early since the session hadn't started yet, so why was she rushing off somewhere? But the girl coldly said that she had to check something, and it was something more specific, someone very important. And Yoon-pyo asked directly what was so important that she had to rush off like that, and received the answer that it was about the Santorum fault. His answer certainly did not reassure him, because he knew that at least one black cat was running around here, and he just looked silently at the departing car. Yoon-pyo understood that he was not a fool because Santorum was a place that the Brazilian Association had warned about, saying that it was worth staying away from such hell for as long as possible. And so, everything goes on as usual, and they have already arrived at the very place called Santorum, or more precisely, to the fault not far from it, which is also not a very safe place. Naturally, the leader of this expedition was So Do-jun, who acted as if he went to such wormholes full of anthropomorphic monsters every day. To be honest, Ju-yeon herself was annoyed that the young man was in such a hurry to get somewhere, so she wanted to know where he was rushing to, but the genius in leather boots said that they were late. He was waiting for them, and Ju-yeon, shocked by these twists and turns, shouted that if this psychopath had said something earlier, nothing like this would have happened, and they would have solved everything right away. But no, he decided that he would lead everyone himself. But Ju-yeon herself wants to know why this psychopath dragged them all here. And Do-jun, go ahead and tell us about the blue crocodile. An interesting statement. And yes, it seems that they came to this hell because of something as small as a crocodile. And Do-jun didn't understand what they didn't like at all now. It's a good reason, but he's gotten a little cocky because Ju-yeon is 3 years older than him, and he's such a cheeky boy, talking to her like she's some snotty little girl from the street. The team already knows that a real love drama is beginning, especially Jong and Ju, who knew that arguments over respect are the first step to a romance, no matter how you look at it. Ju-young was polite almost all the time and reminded Do-jun to behave the same way, and all the cheerful brothers are shocked by his behavior because how can you argue with this goddess? The simpler characters couldn't believe that they could so easily fall into a rift, and one of them knew that since Ju-yeon was there, everything would be fine, so why should they worry? The experienced guy with long brown hair understood that this was the case, but he was very annoyed by the newcomer who acted as if he knew everything about the world. The swordsman grunted, saying that the newcomer certainly sounded rather unconvincing, but they shouldn't be lumped together, just as heroes can also be different. And the young warrior said that yes, this newcomer, So Do-jun, was truly legendary, so there was no point in bad-mouthing him here, because he would prove himself to them yet. No one believed that he was a legend until Do-jun was rude to Ju-yeon, saying that she was annoying him and clinging to him like a leech, so she should calm down and stop her circus act. The girl understood that this madman had definitely decided to destroy the rift, so she had to keep a close eye on him, because he could pull off even more tricks after that. Do-jun said that he just wanted his desired element, so why the hell would he destroy the rift? He would just squeeze it like an orange. But Ju-yeon didn't believe his words. He was about to get the material, but she didn't have to guess for long as everyone else did, because immediately, as if responding to her voice, a creature with iron tentacles crawled out from under the ground. Enough talk. They were soldiers, not scientists. So they had to look ahead and watch their step so as not to become lunch for a tropical monster and perish in the tropics. The swordsman in front gave the order to immediately begin preparations and react, because this was no longer the monster he once knew, but a true monster of the jungle. He himself understood that they were in a rather difficult situation and realized that there were really a lot of monsters here, and he couldn't even know what to do. They had not been warned that there would be so many monsters here, and they were like idiots who had no idea where to go or what to do to avoid losing. The newbies were really stressed out because it looked too dangerous, as there were way more monsters than they could have imagined at the start of the expedition. The men were immediately told to step back from the danger because otherwise they would die here like flies, not knowing how and where to swing their swords because fear paralyzed their bodies. Dujun decided that he would go forward and took his sword out of its sheath, preparing to deliver a deadly blow to the monsters he knew so well from his ancient world. And this tall young man, whom they considered a weak idiot, was now asking them to stay away because he wanted to take control of the situation, and they knew he was telling the truth. Dujun understood that it was not easy to pull out the heart of a blue crocodile, and knowing this, the blacksmith temporarily gave the young man his sword, seeing how confident he was in his abilities and the situation. And since he had been given such a chance, he would have to be a complete idiot to pass it up. And Dojun, taking the same sword from the blacksmith, was ready to cut his way forward. The enemy was formidable, and he himself was no ordinary man, ready to do anything to break through. He was simply the greatest of all the great newcomers in the world. The monsters were very strong, and it was very difficult to stand against them in such a serious battle. So Dujun would know exactly where and how to have fun. This guy cut down huge monsters that made simpler heroes tremble and showed them that they shouldn't underestimate him because he was simply a god with his sword. And to be honest, everyone knew this because this man immediately seemed like a genius to the swordsman with a tail, and he knew that everything would be exactly as he had thought at first. The simpler heroes trembled like little dogs because they felt that they would die here, as Dujun performed real miracles with his sword and staff. And indeed, even if you gave Dojun a stick, he would have performed wonderfully with it, and it is clear that he is truly a god of the sword, even if he does not have full physical strength.